Chapter 121, Fanaticism. I know the confusion in your heads. Sagres' calm voice rang out at the right moment. He tapped his temple lightly with a long, slender finger. Don't worry, the knowledge carved into your minds won't disappear. What you've lost for now is merely precise control over it. His voice cut through the chaos. You have all felt successful spellwork, and remember that feeling. It's very simple to get it back. Practice. He spoke rationally, without warmth, almost cold. Someone diligent might regain the feeling after 10 tries. Someone lazy might need thousands of repetitions to barely grasp it. That's fair, isn't it? With that, he casually waved his wand, and the transfigured training dummies and practice area melted away, replaced by neat rows of oak tables and chairs. Sagres inclined his head once. Class dismissed. Go eat. The students poured toward their house tables like a tide, the great hall exploding with tired, exhilarated noise. Professor Flitwick scurried to Sagres, high-pitched voice bubbling with awe. Sagres? What kind of magic was that? You created it yourself, didn't you? That's right, Sagres nodded calmly. The other professors didn't crowd him, but their interest was obvious. Even Snape paused, hand on his sleeve. Merlin's beard, that's simply breathtaking. Flitwick nearly bounced. When I first heard of it, I thought it was a simple emotion charm, but I was wrong. It's brilliant. Your charms instruction has already surpassed mine. You will always be my teacher, Sagres replied evenly, then dropped a revelation. Do you remember my years in Azkaban? The inspiration for this spell came from observing and studying Dementors. Oh my goodness, Flitwick exclaimed. McGonagall and Sprout covered their mouths in astonishment. Kestrel wondered if she should visit Azkaban to research powerful magics. Only Snape's pupils tightened. The pieces clicked in his mind. No wonder the man had meekly surrendered to that prison. He'd used it as a laboratory to study the creatures even dark wizards avoided. Azkaban was uniquely suited to Dementor study. What, then, was he doing at Hogwarts, digging into the castle's own secrets? At the long tables, the students were exhausted but electric. Many waved wands between bites, trying to recreate the feeling from class. The clatter of cutlery mixed with lively chatter. Neville Longbottom was among the most jubilant. The shy second year, who usually lacked confidence, now glowed with a new certainty. His wand could only throw a feeble spark at the moment, but the mechanics, the wrist angle, the cadence of the incantation, the sensation of magic coalescing, were vivid in his mind. It felt like a miracle. Sagres' practical charms lesson hit Hogwarts like a stone in a still lake. Precise instruction and instant results reignited a dormant dueling fervor. The hall, alive with spelllight and talk, became the seed of a craze that spread through the castle. Corridors, empty classrooms, even the edges of the Quidditch pitch became impromptu dueling grounds. Students clustered in groups, echoing Sagres' terse commands, target, movement, will, and grew more adept with Expelliarmus, shield charms, and stupefy. In common rooms, technical discussion replaced gossip. Professor Flitwick found younger students' charms work had noticeably improved, especially its practical side. Beneath the enthusiasm, though, a darker current ran. Sagres' emphasis on removing threats and decisive precision was misread by some as raw aggression and a worship of power. House rivalries found a new outlet disguised as sparring. At first, the incidents were minor. 2 older Slytherins invited Neville to spar on his way to the greenhouses. He was struck by Expelliarmus, ended up in the mud with his wand skittering away. Susan Bones was grazed by a stray red stupefy behind the library, her books scattering. The culprits shrugged and grinned. Just practice. Don't be so tense. Victims, facing the excuse of practice and lacking proof, often swallowed their anger. Then things escalated. Robert Hilliard of Ravenclaw was ambushed by 3 hooded students in a secluded corridor and pelted with Expelliarmus and Stupefy. He managed a shield charm, but was cornered, his wand nearly torn from his grip before the attackers vanished. Worse, some began to hunt specific targets. Gregory Goyle, who'd shown weaknesses in class and belonged to a rival house, was cornered at the trophy room entrance by several Gryffindors who claimed they were helping him improve. They knocked him back with Expelliarmus and locked him in with Petrificus Totalis, leaving only after thoroughly humiliating him. Goyle was bruised and swollen. Shame, anger, and fear of being labeled weak kept him silent. His condition didn't escape notice. When Draco Malfoy saw Goyle looking disheveled in the Slytherin common room, ice formed in his eyes. Goyle! His cold voice echoed. Several first years fell silent. Come here. Explain that. Look on your face. Goyle flinched. And nothing, Draco. I just fell. Fell? Malfoy sneered. Into this state? Do you think I'm blind? He stepped closer, voice low and threatening. It was those Gryffindors, wasn't it? How many of them? Goyle's eyes darted away. Don't ask, Malfoy. There were too many. He tried to move away. I just want to go back to the dormitory. Malfoy's expression hardened. He glanced at the few students listening and snapped. What are you looking at? They averted their eyes and left. Tell me, who did it? Malfoy demanded, wand half out. Goyle retreated a step. I didn't see clearly, he stammered. There were several. They said they were helping me improve. Malfoy's anger flared. He felt offended and humiliated. Goyle was part of his circle. Attack Goyle and you'd slapped Malfoy and Slytherin itself. Cowards, he spat. They hide in ambush. He fixed Goyle with a cold stare. Remember this. Slytherin doesn't accept humiliation. Weakness invites more bullying. Next time, fight back. Use what you've learned. Don't be a Hufflepuff. Goyle said nothing. Malfoy grabbed his robes and hauled him toward the hospital wing. When we get back, practice with me, properly. If it happens again, hit them back hard. Goyle nodded sullenly. Chapter 122, Cast a Spell on Me. Meanwhile, in the warm Gryffindor Tower common room, the mood was equally somber. In a corner, Neville dabbed at the mud on his robe, his eyes downcast. Harry, Ron, and Hermione huddled around a table away from the crowd, speaking in heated whispers, their faces grave. This isn't sparring at all. Ron slammed his fist on the table so hard the ink bottle jumped. Look at Neville. And Susan Bones, right outside the library. This is madness. Hermione frowned, flipping through her dog-eared copy of Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Defense, as if the answer might be tucked in its pages. Professor Greengrass's aim was to teach us to protect ourselves, not to bully others. These attacks, they're a complete misuse of magic, the worst distortion of his teaching. School rules say, she began, then closed the book in frustration. We have to report this to Professor McGonagall or Headmaster Dumbledore. It's out of control. Harry stared into the fire, anger simmering behind his green eyes. He remembered Dudley and his friends, the helplessness and humiliation. Hermione's right. This isn't about improving. It's cowards hiding behind practice and hoods. His voice dropped, dangerous. They only pick on people who are alone, Neville, and even. Goyle? Ron cut in. He deserves it. Look at how he and Crabbe act. Ron, Hermione snapped. It doesn't matter who it is. Being cornered by a group, pinned with Petrificus Totalis, humiliated, that's too far. And she looked around the common room, lowering her voice. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs are already looking at us like all the attackers are Gryffindors. This can't continue. Harry nodded. Exactly. Professor Greengrass meant dueling to help us defend ourselves. Instead, it's become Pandora's box. News spread quickly through the castle. Injured and embarrassed students shuffled under Madame Pomfrey's watchful eye. Resentment and anger smoldered quietly in all four houses. Even within the same house, under the pretense of sparring, trust was fraying fast. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick received a handful of vague complaints, but with no clear perpetrators or evidence, there was little they could do. Professor Snape, grim-faced, tightened patrols at the entrance to the Slytherin dungeons, his cold gaze cutting across every non-Slytherin who passed, laying down a visible warning. Still, the problem grew until it could no longer be ignored by the man who had started the dueling classes, Sagres. On Saturday, during the second dueling lesson while students practiced shield charms, Sagres appeared silently between a Slytherin and a Gryffindor, exchanging short, sharp Expelliarmus shots. There had been a hardness to their faces, irritation sparking with each cast. He raised no hand. He simply said quietly, "Stop." His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the tension. The spell light vanished, and the two students froze, pale. Sagres' gaze swept the great hall. It wasn't merely observing now, but assessing, cooling into something like disappointment. He didn't scold or lecture at length. He climbed the instructor's platform and spoke to everyone with measured calm. It seems some of you, having learned a few spells, have forgotten where the boundaries lie. The statement chilled the room. Sagres walked to the center of the hall, and an invisible pressure spread outward. Practicing ceased. The wand lights winked out one by one. Breathless silence followed. I do not teach dueling as an excuse to bully, nor as a cloak for indulging personal vendettas. My only purpose is to teach you how to defend yourselves against real threats. He didn't name incidents, but his look swept across the students like a probe, and those involved in malicious sparring or who had suffered from it felt a cold prick of recognition. He did something nobody expected. He singled out a Gryffindor prefect who had performed best in recent practice, Percy Weasley. "Mr. Weasley," Sagres said, voice firm, "cast your most proficient offensive spell at me. Any spell." A collective intake of breath rippled through the hall. Percy paled but obeyed. "Immediately," Sagres added with such authority it brooked no refusal. Percy squared his shoulders, raised his wand, and cried, "Stupefy!" A bolt of red light streaked across the hall toward Sagres. He did not draw his wand. With the faintest, almost careless flick of a hand, he diverted the spell as if tapping it against an invisible surface. The red bolt arced back and struck Percy full in the chest. Percy collapsed without a cry. Silence fell so thick it felt physical. Hundreds of eyes darted between the prone prefect and Sagres. Slowly, Sagres drew his wand and waved, removing the stupefy. Percy woke with a shudder, face ashen, as if shaken awake from a nightmare. "Do you see?" Sagres asked, calm and unruffled. "The disparity in power can be vast. Do you truly understand what power is?" Heads bowed. Those who had used their magic to hurt others trembled. "Now," Sagres continued, his icy gaze sweeping the room, "everyone, pick up your wands and cast a spell at me. Any spell." There was a stunned pause. No one moved. A thin, almost cruel smile touched his lips. "Afraid of hurting me? Afraid of killing me? Or is your courage only large enough to attack weaker classmates?" No one answered. "Turning on the weak to sate your own appetite for cruelty," he said, looking at several students who lowered their eyes guiltily. "That is the most contemptible, cowardly act. It is a desecration of magic." He walked slowly through the hushed ranks, voice low, but carrying the weight of finality. "Effective immediately, all unauthorized private duels within the castle are forbidden. Any spell attack proven to be malicious, or that takes place outside of supervised consensual settings, will not be handled as a mere school rules violation. It will be dealt with directly by me." His stare stopped on faces, and the guilty instinctively looked away. "Believe me, you do not want to fall into my hands." When the students flinched like a flock, he added almost placidly, "Of course, I will give you a chance. Want to prove yourselves? You may, but it must be within the rules and under my supervision." 123. The best professor at Hogwarts. 2 days later, a magically enchanted parchment that updated itself appeared on the notice board in the center of the Great Hall, the Hogwarts Dueling Rankings. Beside it was an application form for a dueling badge. Anyone could pick up a form, fill it out, and hand it to their dean. The rules for the rankings were short and strict. 1. Qualification. Anyone who held a badge and whose information was entered would be listed. 2. Challenge rules. Formal duels were only allowed against opponents ranked higher than oneself. Challenges required at least 24 hours' notice and had to be supervised by Sagres himself or by a professor mutually agreed upon by both duelists, who would act as referee and safety officer. Challenging someone ranked below you was strictly forbidden. 3. Protection mechanism. Each challenged person had a cooling-off period. No one could accept more than 3 formal challenges per week, preventing malicious, continuous targeting. 4. Mandatory reconciliation. Anyone who, during the previous dueling craze, had harmed or humiliated another student under the guise of sparring had 3 days to personally and sincerely apologize to their victim in front of a witness, a prefect or professor. The apology had to be recorded, and the victim's forgiveness had to be obtained before the offender could receive a dueling badge. The moment the list went up, the school erupted, then settled into a strange new order. The belligerent energy was redirected into formal, legitimate challenges. Confronting someone stronger under the watchful eyes and rules of the rankings became a badge of honor. Those who had bullied the weak discovered their power was meaningless next to true strength, and their opportunities for arbitrary cruelty vanished. Most students complied with the apology requirement under the cold force of Sagres' authority and the ranking rules. They sought out their former victims and, in front of prefects or professors, said the required words. Some apologies were stiff and begrudging, others came with genuine shame. Some victims forgave, some refused. But public apologies slowly began to mend cracks. A few tried to be clever and skirt the system, pretending to forget or making perfunctory, insincere apologies because they thought they were untouchable. Sagres's response was simple and ruthless. He didn't waste time with point deductions or detentions, and he rarely raised his voice in class. Instead, he sent impeccably formal, detailed letters to the parents of these well-connected students. The letters named the exact actions, times, places, and victims, and specifically noted the child's refusal to comply with the apology order. At the end was Sagres's cold signature and an unambiguous demand. Please come to Hogwarts in person within 1 hour of receiving this letter to coordinate on this matter and to supervise your child's fulfillment of their apology obligation. When a few pale-faced, pureblood parents stood in the Great Hall before professors and students and ordered their children to bow and apologize, that silent humiliation carried infinitely more weight than any detention. Sagres had expected exactly this. He knew these young wizards too well. He knew they would try to play deaf and dumb for a few days, waiting for the right moment. He had planned for it. Used the rankings to direct their ambition, the rules to shape their behavior, mandatory apologies to repair some wounds, and public punishment to hit the incorrigible where it hurt. Slowly, the castle's atmosphere shifted. Private brawls dwindled, the passion for rising in the rankings took over. Corridor talk changed from who taught whom a lesson yesterday to so-and-so's ranking went up again, or Potter's Expelliarmus is lightning fast. The students who had been humiliated felt that rules now protected them, so the dueling craze abated like a fire on ice after the second dueling class. Detentions? Point deductions? Sagres had many means of enforcement, but he preferred subtler, corrective methods. He wasn't trying to win their affection. He wanted to steer these headstrong young wizards with outdated ideas toward the right path. In the following days, the busiest person in the castle became Kestrel. A steady stream of students sought out the new professor, Professor Lumina, to preside over duels, and many of those required to apologize chose her as their witness. Her age and manner suited the students. They liked this seemingly carefree, almost unreliable-sounding professor. Kestrel herself enjoyed the attention. Whenever she acted as a witness, she would pull the apologizer aside, lower her voice, and with a warm look of understanding say, "Leave it to me, but you must really be sorry." She'd wink. That's the condition. The apologizer would often breathe a huge sigh of relief. "Thank you so much, Professor Lumina. Professor Greengrass said we shouldn't have been messing around after learning only a little magic. We know we were wrong." "Good. That you know that," Kestrel said, placing a hand on her chest and making a solemn vow. "Don't worry. Leave it to me. If it doesn't work this time, it will next time. I'll go persuade them first." "Thank you, Professor Lumina. You really are the best professor at Hogwarts." "Oh, it's nothing." Kestrel would wave off the praise and flash a bright smile. Then she would slip over to the victim, lean in, and whisper conspiratorially, "Make sure you don't let them off easily. Make them apologize a few more times. Teach them a lesson. Don't worry, I'll help you uphold justice and make them regret it." "Thank you, Professor Lumina. Next time." "Of course you'll come to me next time. I'll teach you what to do. Satisfaction guaranteed." Kestrel adopted the manner of a sympathetic ally. "Thank you so much, Professor Lumina. You really are the best professor at Hogwarts." "Oh, it's nothing," she repeated, still smiling. Her tactic, playing both sides and keeping everyone happy, worked remarkably well at first. She flitted through corridors, empty classrooms, and courtyards like a busy, cheerful bee, leaving a trail of, "Oh, it's nothing," and contented smiles from both parties, even though their goals were opposed. She took pride in what she called efficient mediation, believing she had soothed victims and profoundly educated wrongdoers, a win-win. But there are no secrets in the castle, especially when one pair of eyes was watching how the rules were enforced. Sagres noticed the pattern with little effort. Repeated delays in the apology process, suspect witness records, Kestrel's overactive presence, and the almost worshipful gratitude both sides expressed toward her formed a very odd picture. This was far from the sincere healing the mandatory apologies were meant to produce. Only when Loctis began to use the phrases, "You are truly the best professor at Hogwarts," and "Oh, it's nothing," did Kestrel start to rein herself in a bit. One afternoon, humming a tune as she returned contentedly to her office after her 11th failed mediation, witnessing, Kestrel looked up to find Sagres standing in her doorway. The late light from the stained glass window threw his tall figure into a long shadow that swallowed half the corridor. In his hand, he held a thick stack of parchment reports, each stamped, "Witness Professor Arisa Lumina," and "Mediation Result, Not Reached." The corridor felt unusually quiet, the air almost solid with pressure. Sagres turned slowly, his cold gray eyes locking onto Kestrel. He didn't speak, he only lifted the stack of parchments. That small gesture froze the smile on her face. His handsome features remained unreadable, not angry so much as calmly omniscient. "Professor Lumina, our best professor at Hogwarts," he said without inflection. "Perhaps you could explain." He let the papers flutter, scanning the repeated signatures and identical results. This unique method of mediation and its significant effect on the efficiency of enforcing the apology order? Kestrel's smile vanished. For the first time in a long while, panic flickered in her usually bright, cunning eyes. Seeing Sagres at her door, she knew the game was up. Her little self-congratulations had been laid bare. "Oh, wasn't I just trying to make everyone happy?" she said, spreading her hands and forcing a sunny, ingratiating smile. "Look how good it is now. Everyone's so much happier." "Is that so?" Sagres' voice was flat. "I think you're the happiest one. I was just trying to help them resolve their conflicts." Kestrel's confidence wavered. Her voice softened. "They're almost resolved. Tomorrow, I'll make sure every mediation is successful." Sagres' brows drew together. He looked over her, taking in the expression that practically screamed, "I'm innocent." "Your teaching load is no lighter than mine," he said, "and even if you don't set homework, you shouldn't have this much idle time, should you?" "Hey, I haven't been slacking," Kestrel snapped back, straightening as if affronted. "They're learning so well. Their shield charms, obstacle curses, and the counter curses are improving. You can check." "I know," Sagres cut in, almost disdain barely hiding beneath his calm. "I know the students' defenses have improved. I wasn't talking about them. I was talking about you." He sighed, so quietly it was almost a sound under the hum of the corridor. "What about me?" Kestrel muttered, defensive now. "I'm a good professor. I'm teaching my students well." "You're too idle," Sagres said plainly. Then, without preamble, he gave an order. "There's something I need you to do." "What is it?" Kestrel bristled, already trying to resist. "I've been very busy lately." "Didn't you say all mediations would be successful tomorrow?" Sagres asked, brow arching. "What are you busy with?" "Oh, right, I forgot." She shifted instantly, throwing on a roguish, carefree expression as if nothing were amiss. "Then I'm free now." Sagres ignored the display and stated his task. "I want a dueling arena built next to the Quidditch pitch, large enough for the whole school to watch. You will help with that." "Ah!" Kestrel lilted, feigning reluctance. "What ah?" Sagres' look was calm, his presence an invisible pressure. "Unwilling?" Willing. Kestrel snapped upright, forcing a resigned grin. "I've just been waiting for you to give me something to do. I couldn't be happier." "Wait for my notice," Sagres said, then turned and left without another look. Sagres didn't bother filing a long report. He went straight to the principal's office and knocked. Inside, Dumbledore sat with a plate of fizzing whiz-bees, his blue eyes twinkling behind half-moon spectacles. "Ah, Sagres," he greeted cheerfully. "Care for a sweet? They help one think clearly." Sagres declined with a wave. "Principal, you've surely noticed the school's overzealous dueling mania and the chaos that's come with it." "Indeed, it's hard not to notice," Dumbledore agreed gently. "But isn't this what you wanted to encourage? And I imagine you arrived with a plan already formed." He winked. "Your dueling leaderboard and badge ideas are quite clever. Even an old man like me couldn't resist applying for one." He produced a simple iron badge from his robe pocket that shimmered faintly in the firelight. "Very clever magic. The scoring is obvious, but the ingenious part is how it can, sense the wearer's intent. Any malicious intent is revealed before it takes effect." "That's still not enough, Principal," Sagres said calmly. Corridors and abandoned classrooms cannot provide a truly safe environment for real combat. Students need a fixed, standardized place designed for dueling. He pushed a rolled parchment across the mahogany desk. The blueprint unrolled to reveal a massive circular platform suspended at the edge of the Quidditch pitch. In the center rose an ancient stone tablet. Around it, tiers of magically reinforced seating climbed like towers. The header read, Contract Dueling Arena, and the description detailed a permanent dueling domain built around a dueling spirit tablet. Its features would include 1. Absolute protection, stronger than temporary domains, able to absorb and transform stray spell energy completely, ensuring absolute safety for spectators and duelists. 2. Environmental simulation. The arena could generate simple obstacles or terrain changes, sand, low walls, shallow puddles, on a challenger's request to add realistic variables. 3. Panoramic projection. Duels would be magnified and projected into the air above the arena, so distant spectators could see every spellcasting detail. 4. Crowd amplifier. Cheers would be focused and guided into a controllable energy flow, capable of adding random environmental effects to matches. 5. High-tier trial ground. The arena would permanently host the high-difficulty solo trials and the peak arena challenges for dueling badge advancement. Dumbledore leaned over the parchment, fingertips tracing the plan. Silence filled the room, broken only by the soft preening of Fawkes on his perch. A magnificent stage, Dumbledore said at last, eyes bright with admiration. It embodies your vision perfectly. Safety, fairness, and above all, visibility. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. A public arena and dueling badges will expose ambushes that hide in the shadows. He popped another fizzing Whizbee into his mouth. I approve. Place it on the east side of the Quidditch pitch. It has an open view, won't interfere with Quidditch practice, and is conveniently close to the castle. During construction, the entire Hogwarts staff will support you. Sagres bowed slightly. Understood, Principal. So I'm off. Chapter 125. Construction begins. News of the duel arena spread through the castle like wildfire. Students buzzed with excitement as if someone had cast cheering charm after cheering charm. This arena promised to channel chaos into sport and learning. Sagres had high hopes for it. A new discipline with endless teaching potential and, frankly, more thrilling than Quidditch in his opinion. On an otherwise ordinary afternoon, Sagres gathered the professors who had volunteered to help and led them to the chosen clearing. While the others debated where to begin laying foundations, Sagres walked calmly to the center of the site. He did not utter long incantations or make grand gestures. He raised his right arm, wand tip angling toward the earth, and with a short, cold word breathed, "Shape!" The word was not loud, but it hit everyone like a wave. The ground trembled. Then, as if seized by a will of its own, the earth ripped open. Granite and soil were torn free, lifted in a thunderous, grinding roar as if an unseen hand had ripped the crust apart. Dust billowed, and broken stone fell like rain. Sagres flicked his wrist. A sudden vortex gathered the dust into a compact ball and drove it clean into the earth. His wand traced precise arcs through the air. With each small movement, the maelstrom of rock and soil obeyed. Massive boulders softened under his magic and were carved into smooth, continuous slabs that fit together with low, grinding clicks. Surfaces polished to mirror smoothness still retained a raw, bedrock solidity. As the platform rose, Sagres drew a semicircle with his wand near the edge of the clearing. Seeds the size of pebbles, planted earlier and enchanted by Professor Sprout, cracked and sprouted with a sharp, energetic sound, as though injected with 100-fold of vigor. Vines surged upward, thick and verdant, writhing and snaking along paths dictated by Sagres' wand. They did not sprawl randomly. They wove themselves into staircases that climbed from the ground and curled to meet the lip of the floating arena. The vines then coiled into sturdy handrails and rows of seating in an instant. Little glowing flowers dotted the vines, opening like lanterns and casting a soft, otherworldly light over the stands. Sagres pointed his wand at the platform's center. A silver-white beam shot from its tip and drove into the heart of the stone. With another roar, a massive stone tablet rose from the center, exuding an austere, ceremonial presence. The whole transformation took mere minutes. As magical vibrations faded, the dust settled, and the fissures in the earth sealed as if nothing had happened. Before the assembled crowd floated a magnificent dual arena, solid, elegant, and utterly impossible seeming. Silence fell across the Quidditch pitch. Hundreds of students and the invited professors stood frozen, as though the entire crowd had been hit with petrificus totalis. Heavy breathing and the thudding of rapid hearts were the only sounds. Ron's jaw hung open. He elbowed Harry like a man pushed beyond words. He did this, all by himself. The rest of his sentence dissolved into a choking, astonished silence. Hermione stared at the circular platform, almost the size of a Quidditch pitch, her lips moving as she ran lists and possibilities through her head. Harry felt his legs go weak. Even students passing by stopped dead, rooted by the spectacle and the sheer implausibility of what they had seen. Sagres finally began assigning tasks. "Professor Flitwick," he said, turning to the excitable little man, "take charge of the core protective enchantments. I will assist." Flitwick was already rubbing his hands together, practically buzzing. Marvelous, brilliant, finally, something other than Quidditch. "Sylvia Sprout," Sagres continued, addressing the herbology professor. "Plant the enchanted vine seeds you brought in suitable locations throughout the castle. I will guide their growth so they form stairways and suspension bridges directly into the arena. Make sure each house common room and major locations like the Great Hall have at least one convenient passage." Sprout nodded cheerfully and set off immediately to mobilize her greenhouses. Sagres let his gaze settle on Professor McGonagall. "Minerva, don't frown yet. Your role is crucial. You will check the protective spells that Professor Flitwick and I set, and," he paused, "you will use your transfiguration to refine the arena's details so every student can clearly view a duel without risking a tumble." McGonagall's stern face softened into a solemn nod. "Very well. Professor Lumina," Sagres added, turning to the rune specialist, Kestrel Lumina, "engrave the runes on the arena as I specify." Kestrel's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, may I sign it?" "No," Sagres said without hesitation. Kestrel's excitement visibly sagged. "Oh," she still smiled, but a little deflated. Finally, Sagres addressed Severus Snape. The potions master stood expressionless, a gloomy statue among the motion. The two men had long been at odds. Sagres understood Snape's displeasure, and how unlikely it was Snape would have come to help if Dumbledore hadn't insisted. He did not intend to let the opportunity go wasted. "You will brew a special adhesive protective layer," Sagres said coolly. "Older students or house elves will apply it evenly to the arena's base circuits." Snape's brows tightened. Sagres continued before the reply could come. "You'll also need a magical coating to absorb impact efficiently. I assume you have a formula for that." Snape's impatience rippled into an ashen scowl, but Sagres went on, his tone casual. "And some stimulating tonics to keep crowds calm, a lubricated magical glue, adhesive salves, a paint that washes off easily." Snape's face twitched. He pushed the words out through clenched teeth. "I teach potions, Professor, not work as an apprentice in an alchemist's shop. The first two I can manage. What are these other things?" Sagres tilted his head as if considering the objection. "You're right. Very reasonable. Then only the first two. Nothing else." He didn't pause for Snape to respond. "It should be no problem. I'll leave it in your hands, Professor." Snape's lips were a thin, colorless line. He nodded stiffly, anger restrained behind his composure, then turned and strode away. Sagres raised his wand, and a series of shimmering, ancient runes flowed from its tip like living creatures, settling precisely on the array's nodes around the arena. They slotted into the protective framework Professor Flitwick had already constructed, forming a more intricate magical network. With the professor's coordinated efforts, the work proceeded smoothly. Each day, large crowds of students gathered at the edge of the Quidditch pitch to watch, pointing and whispering, eyes bright with anticipation. "Merlin's beard. It's almost as big as the pitch. How does a stone that large float?" a Hufflepuff exclaimed, rubbing his eyes. "Of course it's magic. What did you expect?" a Ravenclaw replied, as if it were obvious. "No, you're the one being ridiculous," the Hufflepuff shot back. "I think Hogwarts is changing," a Gryffindor girl murmured, pointing to the vibrant emerald vines and delicate suspension bridges now clinging to the outer walls. "It looks like an ancient forest castle." One sunny afternoon, when the last complex circuit of runes quietly blended into the arena's edge, buzz, The entire dueling arena burst into a soft, potent glow. The light rippled outward like water, brushed over every upturned face, then settled and contained itself. The work was finished. Sagres walked calmly to the edge of the arena and looked down at the students below, who held their breath. His voice was low but carried clearly across the dueling ground. The dueling arena is complete. All future dueling classes will be held here. A thunderous cheer answered him. To celebrate the completion, Sagres arranged a series of grand exhibition matches. This was no Lockhart-style spectacle. He intended these demonstrations to showcase dueling as a serious discipline and to spread the practice across the magical world. News of the contract arena spread as if by duplication charm. It reached the Daily Prophet's newsroom afternoon tea, whispered through ministry corridors, and within days official media all over Europe had picked it up. Pioneers of the magical world, educational innovation at Europe's renowned Hogwarts, one headline read. The Daily Prophet ran a gilded front-page banner. Hogwarts' magical revolution, a 1,000-year-old school creates an impossible structure. Below, the most complex magical structure of our time, potentially redefining the art of dueling. Wizard Weekly took a different tack. Education or performance? Hogwarts Arena sparks debate among pureblood families. The piece recounted the sharp divisions among aristocratic circles at a recent ministry tea. The International Magic Observer ran a special report. European magical education shaken. Durmstrang principal holds emergency meeting overnight, accompanied by a picture of Karkaroff, grim-faced on the deck of an ice ship. The Wizard United Gazette ran, Dumbledore's secret weapon, unveiling the young professor's dangerous network at Hogwarts, alongside a silhouette of Sagres from his Ilvermorny days. Even the staid spell innovation produced a technical feature, with Professor Flitwick authoring a review, the perfect fusion of ancient runes and modern magic, an analysis of contract arena construction techniques. Hogwarts' newly completed contract arena, vast, mysterious, and spectacular, became the hottest topic in Britain, briefly overshadowing the Quidditch World Cup warm-ups. The news spread like enchanted galleons across the channel. Back inside the castle, dueling swept through every corner with unprecedented fervor. In corridors, common rooms, and at tables, young wizards and witches were waving wands, gesturing spells, and arguing tactics. Dueling elbowed its way into campus life alongside dating, Quidditch, and pranks, becoming the newest craze. Speculation ran wild about who would appear in the exhibition matches. Would Headmaster Dumbledore take part? Professor Greengrass? Would they summon dueling masters from abroad? There was no intention of inviting outsiders. Hogwarts had plenty of talent. Snape was skilled, McGonagall's transfiguration was formidable, Flitwick was a former dueling champion, and Dumbledore was widely regarded as the greatest wizard of his generation. Sagres had already spoken with several professors about demonstrating diverse spell work for the students. Then, on the eve of the matches, something happened that made everyone's blood run cold. On a dark, windy night, the castle's gargoyle alarms let out a sharp, piercing shriek that cut the stillness. Professors poured from common rooms and offices, faces grave. Two unusual magical signatures flared at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. They were neither the cold dread of Dementors nor the thunder of centaur hooves, but two immense, unfamiliar presences, like moving mountains, racing toward Hogwarts' protective boundary. Professor Flitwick checked the feedback from the wards. "They aren't registered visitors," he said, disbelief in his voice. "They're approaching the school." Sagres stood atop the astronomy tower, staring into the distance, a faint, unexpected smile at the corner of his mouth. "They arrived quickly," he murmured, voice lost in the wind. Wands were raised as everyone prepared to confront the uninvited arrivals. Dumbledore arrived on the open grounds in front of the castle at the same instant the night sky above the Forbidden Forest was split by two distinct lights. On the left came a magnificent carriage, like a crystal palace, drawn by 12 enormous silver-winged horses. The blue crest of Beauxbatons Academy gleamed on the carriage's side as it moved through the air. It pierced Hogwarts' ancient protective shield like a reflection on water, softly, without causing a ripple. On the right loomed a colossal ice ship, as if carved from 10,000 winters. Its prow was graven with a ferocious sea monster. Its sails bore the double-headed eagle of Durmstrang Institute. It broke the clouds with a roar of grinding ice and sent shards of frost in its wake, and it too passed through the protective wards without visible hindrance. Beauxbatons! Durmstrang! Murmurs and shouts rippled through the gathered professors and students. Why had two of Europe's most renowned schools arrived unannounced in the dead of night, in such dramatic fashion? The crystal carriage and the ice ship descended slowly to the open ground opposite the suspended contract arena. From the carriage stepped Madame Maxime, tall and elegant, alighting amid the glow of her winged horses with a demure, curious smile. From the ice ship came Igor Karkaroff, bundled in furs, his face as bleak as the regions he represented, each step seeming to bring a gust of polar chill. Dumbledore moved forward to greet them. For a moment, the atmosphere on the grounds shifted, tense, expectant, as if the arrival of these uninvited guests had just made the whole night more dangerous and more important at once. Chapter 127. Former Principal. Albus, sorry to disturb you so late, Madame Maxime said, her voice warm and pleasant. Her gaze, however, kept drifting to the enormous floating arena in the distance. Igor and I heard that Hogwarts has built an astonishing dueling ground. The whole of the European wizarding world is talking about it. We couldn't resist coming to see this contract arena we keep reading about in the papers. You are most welcome, Dumbledore replied with a smile. I was actually thinking of writing to both of you just a few days ago to invite you. Karkaroff made a short, cold snort. His tone was hoarse and guarded. Most welcome? Humph. Dumbledore, what message does Hogwarts think it's sending to all of Europe by building such a behemoth? Trying to reshape the rules of wizard dueling? Durmstrang doesn't concern itself with every passing fad, but when it comes to dueling, we have always paid necessary attention. Igor, Durmstrang's dueling tradition is long-standing, while Hogwarts has only just begun exploring, Dumbledore said gently. Incidentally, you do know the chief architect of this arena. He's a graduate of your school. All eyes turned to the man Dumbledore indicated, Sagres Greengrass, walking toward them. Karkaroff's gloomy gaze shifted from the arena to him, now taking on undisguised scrutiny and a faint, barely perceptible unease. Is that so? He said coolly. Mr. Greengrass graduated from Durmstrang with top marks. He refused my offer to stay on as faculty and instead went to Ilvermorny, without hesitation. Heh, Principal Karkaroff, perhaps you've forgotten, Sagres said with a calm smile. You were hardly eager to accept me as a student in the first place. In your teaching, you always favored those with strong backgrounds, he continued, and a nobody like me you've always looked down on. There were mixed reactions among the professors, some amused, some disdainful, others pretending not to hear. Karkaroff's face darkened. He was stoic by nature, so the change was subtle but clear. Professor Greengrass misunderstands, he said stiffly. I treat all students equally. I see, Sagres answered without raising an eyelid. So I was mistaken. I thought the principal was a selfish, cowardly utilitarian. Karkaroff's face went ashen. Before he could fire back, Madame Maxime interceded. The night wind is biting, Igor. The students and staff are waiting in the carriages. Let's get them inside first, then we can talk. Olymp is right. Please, we mustn't keep them, Dumbledore added gently. Dinner's prepared in the Great Hall, and everyone at Hogwarts awaits your arrival. The students had only just received the notice. Quickly, they took their seats at the long tables, whispering and craning necks. What's happening? Didn't we already have dinner? Who cares? I'm a little hungry again. The prefects, as clueless as the rest, still kept order. Soon Dumbledore led the two principals into the brilliantly lit Great Hall. Blimey, she's even taller than Hagrid, Ron gaped, pointing at Madame Maxime. She wouldn't also be? Many people wonder that, Hermione whispered, but Madame Maxime never admits it publicly. She always says she just has a large build. That's a bit much, Ron muttered. Who's that tall, thin man? Harry asked, keeping his eyes on Karkaroff. He seemed to look my way a few times. That's Igor Karkaroff, Durmstrang's headmaster, Ron said, leaning in. I heard he used to be a Death Eater, and after you-know-who fell, he escaped trial by betraying his comrades. Now he's a principal. Durmstrang, Professor Greengrass graduated from there, right? Harry said. That's right. Ron curled his lip. Durmstrang only accepted purebloods back then. After Voldemort's fall, a lot of places were still hostile toward Muggleborns, Hogwarts included in some circles. People like Malfoy and his lot used to think mixing with muggles would taint their noble blood. If you ask me, is there any true pure blood left in Britain? Ron snorted. If they'd only married among themselves, they'd have died out ages ago. Hermione suddenly narrowed her eyes. Who are those two following the principals? The figures behind the arrivals had caught her attention. Ron followed her gaze. I can't see the man well, but that lady, wait, could it be? Who is it? Hermione pressed. Although the woman wore an exquisite silver veil, her posture felt oddly familiar. Avila, Professor Greengrass's friend, Harry whispered. Don't you remember? She saved us in the Forbidden Forest. Oh my goodness, it really is her. Hermione's face lit up. Even under that veil, I'd know her. So she's teaching at Beauxbatons now? She got out of that carriage. I wonder what she teaches, Harry murmured. Shh, look. Hermione raised a finger, excitement bright in her eyes. Their students are coming in. Beauxbatons filed into the hall like a soft breeze. Mostly girls, all immaculate posture, moving with graceful or measured steps. Their silver-blue robes caught the candlelight and shimmered. Durmstrang's contingent was the opposite. All boys, marching in square formations with short, neat hair, sharp, determined expressions, and deep red uniforms that made them look like a disciplined army. Both schools had clearly sent their finest students. To most in the hall, they were impressive. To Sagres, they were unremarkable. A few faces in the Durmstrang ranks were his juniors from his own school days. He remembered that, back then, they weren't even worth his time. He fell into thought. His path to Durmstrang hadn't been easy. He had used every means he could to gain entry, even revealing his status as an Order of Merlin recipient to claw through the doors that were closed to nobodies. As for Egor Karkaroff, Sagres's gaze held a sharper edge. The man was, at heart, an opportunist, more interested in personal advancement than in teaching. His recent protestations of having wanted to keep Greengrass on faculty rang hollow. If Sagres hadn't published 3 influential papers in spell innovation, if his single-author work, Advanced Magical Topology, hadn't made a splash across the wizarding world, Karkaroff, with his snobbish streak, would never have looked kindly on a graduate with no pedigree. Staying at Durmstrang might have been a sensible option, but once Sagres had read through Durmstrang's library and realized how much further he wanted to go to pursue the true meaning of magic, he had no choice but to accept the opportunity at Ilvermorny in America. In the center of the great hall, a new long table gleamed under the candlelight. The Beauxbatons students, like a flock of elegant swans, took their seats on the left. The Durmstrang students, orderly as a regiment, filled the right. When the last guest was seated, Dumbledore tapped his crystal goblet once. The clear chime cut through the hubbub, and the hall fell silent. "Good evening, everyone," he called, standing. Behind his half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes twinkled. "First, allow me, on behalf of all the staff and students of Hogwarts, to extend our warmest welcome to our friends who have traveled so far." He paused, letting his gaze rest warmly on the 2 visiting heads and the assembled elite students. As the 3 ancient schools of magic in Europe, we bear an important responsibility for fostering magical and cultural exchange. Yet since the Tri-Wizard tournament was suspended over 200 years ago, inter-school exchanges have grown rare. His voice brightened. But today, the contract arena can become the bond that renews our friendship. Therefore, I propose that after tomorrow's exhibition match, we add something more challenging, a 3-school joint duel. Madame Maxime's surprise softened into interest. Karkaroff narrowed his eyes and stroked his chin, clearly weighing the proposal. Sagres listened coolly, a flicker of comprehension in his expression. Of course, that was the real reason for this visit. Why else bring a delegation of elite students just for an exhibition? The papers had already spread word. If they didn't act, next year's admissions could be difficult. None of the heads would openly poach students from another school, but parents could choose freely. The 3 of them were the core of European magic. To sit idle while Hogwarts basked in the spotlight would be foolish. Better to ride the coattails and, if pressed, say they were discussing reviving the Triwizard. No one objected. Dumbledore's eyes flicked to Sagres. He gave a conspiratorial wink. Since there are no objections, he clapped his hands cheerfully. Let us commence this grand evening with a sumptuous dinner. No sooner had he finished than the long table was piled high with a dazzling spread. The festive mood was at full swing when a comical figure in baggy trousers suddenly appeared, hanging upside down from the ceiling. "Newcomers? Heard of the great Peeves?" the poltergeist announced, rubbing his hands with delight. Peeves grinned maniacally, and to the horror of the visitors, produced several dark, gleaming dung bombs from his pockets. Professor McGonagall's face went white. The younger students gasped. If Peeves detonated dung bombs at a welcome banquet, Hogwarts would be the laughingstock of Europe. He raised the bombs triumphantly, and Dumbledore's expression tightened as he reached for his wand. Before anyone could act, Sagres looked up and said, deadpan, "Get out of here, Peeves." The simple command struck like a lash. Peeves shrieked, convulsed, and in an instant blurred into a gray smear, fleeing down the hall faster than anyone had ever seen him go. Only a string of incoherent curses trailed in his wake. "A ghost?" a Beauxbatons girl whispered, hand to her mouth, staring where Peeves had been. "That was Peeves," Nightingale explained calmly. "Hogwarts' resident nuisance spirit." "What was he trying to throw something horrible at us?" another girl asked, still pale. "A dung bomb," a Durmstrang boy said with a smirk. "As the name implies." "Enough. I know," the Beauxbatons girl interrupted, wrinkling her nose. "He's brazen enough to cause trouble under Dumbledore's nose?" "Poltergeists have no scruples," Nightingale said. "They aren't truly alive, so they can't be killed. With no fear of death, they do as they please." She glanced across to where Kestrel, sitting beside Sagres at the high table, gave a small wink. The Beauxbatons girl smiled at that. "But he was driven off. Who's that young professor?" she pressed, nodding toward Sagres. "That's an alumnus of Durmstrang," the boy replied respectfully. "He was Grozny for 2 years, from entrance to graduation." "What's Grozny?" "The head duelist, the strongest student," another Durmstrang lad answered eagerly, eyes bright. "But he looks," the Beauxbatons girl trailed off, taking in Sagres' slim, composed figure, "different from what we imagined." "A wizard's strength isn't in his looks or build," Nightingale said gently, though her words carried an edge. "It's in the wisdom of his mind." "Miss Velis makes a good point." Professor Baffaros drawled from across the table, the dismissal clear in his tone. "But if I may be frank, Sagres is still inexperienced. How can he be called powerful?" Nightingale's eyebrow lifted. "Professor Baffaros knows him well?" "I taught him advanced dark arts practicals." Baffaros puffed out his chest. "I admit he's clever, but magic needs practical application. Book learning isn't enough." He pursed his lips with contempt, as if dismissing something unworthy of discussion. 2 Durmstrang students nearby mouthed an objection, but were silenced by a sharp look from a senior beside them. Nightingale's smile was small and unreadable. Baffaros mistook it for encouragement and immediately adopted his most ingratiating expression. "Velis, may I?" "No, Mr. Baffaros," she replied coolly, not lifting her head. His smile froze, as if struck by a stupefy. The students who had watched the exchange forced their heads down, recalling the smaller humiliations of the past 2 years, and barely managed to choke back laughter. Their shoulders still twitched, despite themselves. Chapter 129. Safety Supervisor. The next morning, while the outline of Hogwarts Castle was still faint through the mist, reporters from half a dozen eager papers were already pressing at the school gates. News that 3 schools would hold a united duel tournament had spread like wildfire, clearing the castle walls overnight and igniting the wizarding world's curiosity. It had been over 2 centuries since a Triwizard-style gathering of 3 schools. Now Europe's 3 most prestigious academies were reuniting for a duel. The event naturally drew countless eyes. Even the Ministry of Magic had to take it seriously, though not Minister Fudge himself, but his able assistant, Dolores Umbridge. Short, stout, and always in pink, Umbridge had risen from a minor clerk to senior undersecretary for magical law enforcement through flattery and smooth politicking. She had come bearing the title Safety Supervisor, charged with representing the British ministry's image to the international community and preventing any uncontrollable accidents during the competition. In truth, the title was a little redundant. The floating duel arena was itself built to contain and protect combatants, but Umbridge relished her role all the same. After breakfast, the students and staff were led by the professors along the suspension bridge toward the arena. Walking on the bridge felt like walking on clouds. Hogwarts students had seen this magical venue before, yet even they gasped again at its magnificence. The visiting teachers and students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were even more visibly impressed. They crossed the long green vine bridge through drifting mist. Buds of different colored flowers glowed faintly through the haze. Only when a golden shot of morning sun pierced the fog did the floating duel arena fully reveal itself. The audience took their prearranged seats, chairs naturally woven from verdant vines. From between the leaves they could see Hogwarts below and the endless edge of the forbidden forest beyond. Today's main event would be an exhibition match between professors to stir the students' enthusiasm for dueling and allow time for Hogwarts to select 8 competitors. The 3 heads had decided the night before that each school would send 8 elite duelists chosen by knockout. Once the 3 champions were known, the finals would switch to a round-robin points system. The rules were simple and practical, reflecting the impromptu, exciting nature of the event. The principals, however, had not agreed on who would take part in the professors' exhibition. Dumbledore insisted Hogwarts' own staff would suffice, but Maxime and Karkaroff had brought their school's greatest duelists, wanting to showcase their strength to the wizarding world. The disagreement grew heated. Professor Vilas Nixia, who came with us, is a dueling master recognized by our teachers and students, Madame Maxime said, lifting her chin gracefully and tapping a parchment list with a silk-gloved finger. It would be a shame if she could not participate. Dumbledore answered gently but firmly, "We must remember that the main purpose of this event is to kindle the students' passion for magic, not to show off force." Karkaroff cut in with a sneer. "Albus, you and I both know that in the present climate, displaying strength is the best recruitment brochure." His pale eyes flicked over the list, and his bony hand landed heavily on a Durmstrang name. "Professor Kurd Bofuros represents our school's century-old dueling tradition. If he cannot take the stage," he let the threat hang in the air. After a long and heated exchange, the 3 principals compromised. The exhibition match would feature the visiting duelists from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang as the climactic display. Once everyone was seated, Dumbledore rose and walked slowly to the podium woven from vines. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the arena, "the dueling competition is about to begin. Today, 6 outstanding professors will perform an exhibition match for us. They are Professor Severus Snape, Professor Filius Flitwick, Professor Minerva McGonagall, and Professor Sagres Greengrass from Hogwarts, Professor Vilas Nixia from Beauxbatons, and Professor Kurd Bofuros from Durmstrang." Each name brought fresh cheers from the stands. When he finished the last name, the arena hummed like a pot about to boil. The atmosphere crackled with excitement. Before Dumbledore could announce the match details, the sound of high heels clicking on stone and an affected cough came from the left side of the seating. Dolores Umbridge glided forward like a poisonous pink mushroom, her signature sickly smile glued to her face and a scroll of ministry-sealed parchment clutched in her hands. "Good morning, esteemed principals, professors, and students," she sang in a high, syrupy voice that grated in the open air. "What an exhilarating morning! To ensure that this important international exchange, representing the highest standards of the British wizarding world, proceeds safely, properly, and in accordance with procedure, the Ministry of Magic, under the careful concern of Minister Fudge, has appointed me, Safety Supervisor Dolores Jane Umbridge, to present the latest guiding regulations." She barely gave Dumbledore a nod before unfurling the parchment on the platform, clearing her throat, and reading in an overly officious tone. Article 1. All participants, including the professors who will perform in the exhibition match, must sign the Safety Responsibility Commitment and the Dual Conduct Confirmation, approved by the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement in triplicate. 1 copy is to be filed with the Ministry, 1 with the school, and 1 to be retained by the individual. Those who have not signed are prohibited from participating. Madame Maxime's brows drew together. She rose and fixed Umbridge with a severe look. "Miss Umbridge, Professor Nixia is not under the jurisdiction of the British Ministry of Magic. In fact, none of the students here, myself included, are British. Insisting on these cumbersome documents suggests you do not trust her professional competence. "Oh, my dear Madame Maxime," Umbridge said, her smile unchanged, but her eyes cold. "Trust is lovely, but regulations are necessary. The ministry must be accountable for all possible incidents. This is procedure. It is for everyone's safety." She emphasized the last word as if it were a prayer. Karkaroff's face turned even grimmer. "Professor Bafuros's time is valuable. He will not waste it signing a pile of useless papers. No one knows dueling tradition better than Durmstrang." "Tradition is indeed valuable, Principal Karkaroff," Umbridge replied, almost cooing. "But times change, and the ministry has a duty to bring tradition into a more modern, regulated framework. Please understand, this is a necessary procedure." At her wave, a heavy stack of ink-scented documents materialized before the three principals. Dumbledore looked at Umbridge through his half-moon spectacles and said quietly, "Dolores, while this is somewhat redundant, I believe it will be best for everyone if we cooperate so the event can begin promptly." He took a quill and signed the bottom of the form first. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff exchanged disgusted looks, but reluctantly followed his lead. 130. Chapter, Principals with Max Endurance. After finally signing the papers, Umbridge produced another list. Second rule, regarding the dueling venue. Ministry of Magic Safety Regulations, Article 7, Clause 6, clearly states that any public magical arena must be equipped with an independent protective barrier generator certified by the ministry. Hogwarts' original venue protection is missing ministry certification and routine safety inspection reports. Therefore, I have already arranged for professional personnel from the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes to install the ministry's latest model of absolute safety shield before the exhibition match begins. "Install?" Karkaroff nearly roared. "This arena is itself a masterpiece of modern magic, and it was only just finished. Last night, the three principals tested it. Its protections are 10,000 times more reliable than your scrap metal. Principal Karkaroff, please watch your language." For the first time, her smile faltered, but Umbridge recovered almost immediately. "It is new, and it did pass your inspection, but modern magical engineering requires more detailed ministry checks for safety and controllability. Only the ministry's standards are unified, scientific, and repeatedly verified. For the safety of our international guests, your professors, this is indispensable. The installation should take, about 2 hours. Please be patient." At her cue, several expressionless ministry workers in work clothes, stamped with the ministry crest, carried heavy instruments toward the enormous stone plinth in the center of the arena and began to fit them with clanking noises. Whispers and disgruntled hisses rose from the stands. As everyone suppressed their anger and watched the so-called safety shield being put in place, Umbridge's gaze swept over the 6 participating professors in the waiting area. "Third rule," she announced, her voice sharp with scrutiny, regarding the content of the duel. "To ensure a safe demonstration and to avoid dangerous imitation by underage students, the ministry suggests that the exhibition match be limited to demonstrating basic shield charms and Expelliarmus. Any aggressive, destructive, or potentially uncontrollable spells, certain, more intense spells, are prohibited." She fixed Durmstrang's Professor Bafuros with a pointed look. "I have noticed that Durmstrang's use and teaching of magic tends to be more direct. So, for safety's sake, Professor Bafuros, please adhere strictly to this guideline." "What?" Karkaroff exploded. His finger trembled as he jabbed the air toward her. "You're telling a Durmstrang dueling master, at a highly anticipated exhibition, that he may only use shield charms and Expelliarmus? This is an insult. It tramples Durmstrang's centuries-old dueling tradition. Professor Bafuros excels in practical combat, in suppression, in techniques that render opponents helpless, not your childish parlor tricks." Professor Bafuros did not answer, but his pressed lips and the fury burning behind his eyes said enough. He stood with crossed arms, chest heaving, as if he might draw his wand any second. Umbridge, however, covered her chest in an exaggerated gesture and feigned shock. "Oh my, Principal Karkaroff, you are far too agitated. Safety, everything is for safety. You see, Beauxbaton's Professor Nightingale seems to understand perfectly." She turned to the elegant witch with long silver-white hair, a flash of disdain in her eyes. Subtle, elegant defense can also demonstrate the finesse of magic, can't it? Excessive aggression will only cause unnecessary panic, especially with so many children present. The ministry's guiding principle is harmony, safety, and control. Please comply. Nightingale said nothing, expressionless, though a cold glint flickered in her eyes. The Hogwarts students could no longer contain themselves. Who does she think she is? Ron fumed to Harry and Hermione. Professor McGonagall told us that arena couldn't even be breached by a dragon. What's the point of that hideous shield she's installing? And she wants the professors to only use Expelliarmus? What's there to watch? Typical bureaucracy, someone muttered. Hermione frowned and pulled a copy of the Ministry of Magic Current Regulations Compendium from her bag, flipping through it quickly. The clauses she's quoting are either taken out of context or they're newly issued, vaguely worded advisory opinions, not mandatory decrees. She's just using safety as an excuse to meddle. Look at that pink outfit and that fake smile, Ginny sneered. She's a toad in lipstick. Luna and Astoria did not argue. They only sighed and tried to calm the furious Ginny. George Weasley, deliberately loud so everyone nearby could hear, called out, "I'll bet a Galleon Umbridge's next rule will be that duels must be fought with pink wands, and before casting each spell, you have to recite the Ministry of Magic Safety Conduct Code." Fred added, "And that victory will be judged by whose smile best conforms to the Ministry's harmony standard." Suppressed snickers rippled through the crowd. Durmstrang and Beauxbaton students didn't understand all the specifics, but they could see the contempt directed at the pink figure from the way the Hogwarts students glared and from Umbridge's behavior. The three principals stood together, their faces dark. Dumbledore remained outwardly calm, but the look behind his glasses was no longer gentle. Madame Maxime straightened, chin raised as if bearing a great insult. Karkaroff trembled with fury, gripped tight on his wand, itching to fling a nasty curse. The woman in pink was wielding petty authority, cloaking it in safety and regulations, to strangle the excitement of what should have been a celebratory event. The air itself felt suffocating with disgust aimed squarely at her. Umbridge, though, seemed oblivious, or perhaps she relished it. Her nauseatingly sweet smile never left her face as she surveyed her territory, ready to hand down another for everyone's good decree at any moment. When a ministry official handed a thick stack of safety responsibility pledges to Professor Sagres, the young man's patience finally snapped. He must have been remarkable to sit through so much of Umbridge's brazen behavior. Clearly, the three principals had nerves of steel. But indulgence was not his habit. With an expressionless snap of his fingers, the hefty bundle of parchment was engulfed in a pale white flame and turned to ash in an instant. Then he casually pointed his wand at the absolute safety shield in the center of the arena. There were terrified screams from the ministry workers. The cold, gleaming instrument of metal instantly ran red and melted into a pool of molten iron. An invisible force seized it, flinging the molten blob like a thrown lump of snot toward the edge of the forbidden forest. Umbridge's saccharine fake smile finally cracked, replaced by an expression of stunned fury. She charged at Sagres like a pink salamander whose tail had been trodden on, her short, stubby finger thrust so close to his nose it might have poked it. "You! What have you done?" Her shrill voice rose with anger. She stood with her hands on her hips, the trembling index finger still pointing at Sagres. "How dare you openly destroy Ministry of Magic property? This is a blatant— I demand you." Swoosh. A cutting curse sliced through the air. Umbridge felt a gust of wind and a sudden coldness at her fingertip. Plop. The aggressive, stubby finger, still lacquered with pink nail polish, fell to the cold stone and rolled twice before coming to rest. Umbridge froze. She drew back her hand in disbelief and stared. "Ah!" A rough, pig-like shriek tore from her throat. It lasted only half a second before Nightingale flicked her wand. A silencing charm landed squarely on Umbridge and trapped the scream back inside her. "Always maintain elegance, madam," Nightingale said without emotion. Terror replaced the color in Umbridge's face. She looked around at the professors and, on instinct, raised the other hand to accuse, then froze mid-gesture. Only then did she fully comprehend that the finger she used to point had been severed and gone. 6 professors watched impassively. No one stepped forward. Even Professor Filius, usually amiable, merely pursed his lips and looked away. The silence was an unspoken acquiescence. Sagres lowered his eyelids and touched the severed finger with the tip of his wand. It bobbed unsteadily and hovered in front of Umbridge, who began to sob silently. "How careless, Madam Umbridge," he said flatly, as if noting a triviality. "You dropped something." The venue fell into an eerie hush. Even the Durmstrang students, hardened by duels, held their breath. Hogwarts pupils stared with widening eyes. The chill crawling up their spines told them Sagres's ruthlessness exceeded anything they had imagined. The ministry officials who had accompanied Umbridge were dumbfounded. They had never expected an open attack on a high-ranking ministry official to occur in plain sight at Hogwarts, the country's foremost magical institution. Several of them felt their knees go weak and reached for their wands, but under Sagres's cold gaze, they froze. Karkaroff was the first to react. A brief flicker of satisfaction passed across his gaunt face before he sternly rebuked. "You are being far too impulsive. How can you be so disrespectful to a ministry official?" Madame Maxime gave a short gasp and covered her mouth with a handkerchief. Behind the shock in her eyes, there was also a trace of contempt for Umbridge's self-inflicted humiliation. Beauxbaton's elegance did not obligate sympathy for a petty tyrant. Enough. Dumbledore's voice, though not loud, cut through the tension and stilled the whispering. His sapphire eyes swept first to Sagres, then to Umbridge, who was on the verge of fainting. "Madame Pomfrey, take Dolores to the hospital wing immediately. Do everything you can to treat her." Madame Pomfrey moved without hesitation. She waved her wand. A gentle charm staunched the bleeding in Umbridge's hand. She did not touch the floating finger, but kept it controlled with her wand as she half-supported, half-dragged the sniffling, limp Umbridge away. Several horrified ministry officials, as if awakening, stumbled after them. Dumbledore turned back to Sagres, his tone calm but heavy. "Professor Greengrass, your actions have gone far beyond what is acceptable. An assault on a ministry official while on duty is an extremely serious matter. You will be expected to give a formal explanation to the ministry after the competition." Sagres inclined his head once. "No problem," he said, his face expressionless. "If they really need it, I'll give them a reasonable explanation." Dumbledore paused, his gaze sweeping over Madame Maxime and Karkaroff, then across the teachers and students. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the ministry's safety concerns are not without foundation, but the method of enforcement here has obviously caused unnecessary friction and regrettable consequences." He chose his words carefully. "An accidental incident," he suggested, and with that, he lightly dismissed the disturbance. The professors and visiting heads masked their surprise. Dumbledore continued, "The Triwizard Duel is meant to encourage exchange and learning and to inspire a love and reverence for dueling. Cumbersome procedures and restrictions should not impede that purpose. The exhibition match will proceed as planned. The first contest will feature Severus Snape and Professor Filius, who will present the most splendid and authentic magic duel. Now let us clear the arena and welcome the proper display of magic." There was a beat of silence, then the stands exploded in cheers like a tide breaking. Hogwarts students stomped, whistled, and clapped until their shock and fear burst out. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang joined in, though a faint tang of blood and tension lingered. Umbridge's pall and the memory of her ridiculous absolute safety shield were swept away. All eyes turned back to the arena. Severus Snape, draped in black robes, and the diminutive Professor Filius had already stepped onto the dueling ground. The tall stone scene tablet shimmered. The two professors touched it almost simultaneously. Random scene. The light on the tablet shivered, then settled on low wall ruins. With a dull roar, the tablet sank into the earth. Vines and rocks sprouted and cracked, piles of rubble heaved up. In an instant, the smooth arena became a weathered battlefield. Toppled stone pillars slanted into the soil, waist-high low walls lay jagged and broken, and the ground was strewn with debris. Every fragment promised cover and trap for the duel about to begin. Chapter 132, Snape vs. Flitwick. Snape and Professor Flitwick's eyes met. After a heartbeat of silence, both moved almost at once. Flitwick flicked his wand, and a brilliant blue spell streaked toward Snape. At the same time, his small body, coiled like a release spring, shot left with a whoosh and vanished behind a half-broken low wall. No sooner had he disappeared than a scarlet stupefy slammed into the spot where he'd been standing. Debris scattered everywhere. Snape's counterattack was just as terrifyingly swift. Even before he could reach cover, Flitwick launched another spell, not at Snape, but at the crumbling brick wall beside him. Defindo! The old wall exploded with a sharp roar. Dust leapt into the air, and as Flitwick landed, he tilted his head and, with precise timing, dodged a red bolt from Snape. He swept his wand through the shower of rubble. Multicorphers! The debris seemed to come alive, twisting and stretching into hundreds of thousands of razor-sharp stone arrows, each glinting with a metallic cold. They hovered a beat, then with a keening shriek formed an impenetrable rain of death, pouring down on Snape's position. Whooshes filled the arena as the attack accelerated faster and faster. The stands erupted. Ravenclaws leapt to their feet, cheering for their dean. Slytherins roared approval as their champion stood unbowed. Snape did not flinch. He drew a simple, powerful semicircle with his wand and intoned, "Protego." A condensed hemispherical shield charm blossomed around him. Clang after clang, a relentless cascade of impacts as stone arrows smashed into the barrier, spraying sparks and stone dust. The shield flexed and rippled under the onslaught but held. The crowd went wild. Even students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang applauded. The energy in the arena coalesced, and a sudden fierce wind rose. Leaves and dust whipped about, but they did not blur the scene. If anything, the gusts made every flicker of movement between the two duelists clearer. For many students, this was the first time they'd felt the effects of cheering amplified magic and projection. The audience had become part of the duel, and the spell play landed in their chests as surely as on the battlefield. Flitwick pressed his advantage relentlessly. No pause was given. As the last stone arrows shattered on Snape's shield, he fired another stupefy, and under cover of the low wall was a blur as he moved. Snape blocked the bolt without changing expression, but Flitwick's wand flashed again, this time aimed at the ground beneath Snape. Quicksand trap! The flagstones softened and collapsed into a hungry vortex, trying to drag Snape under. Snape's face tightened. His reaction was instantaneous. He lashed his wand down, and a force threw the quicksand suction aside, hurling him backward like a cannonball out of the trap's range. Flitwick's follow-ups came too fast to breathe. Anticipating Snape's escape, he leaped high from behind the wall. Dazzling white light poured from his wand, and a volley of glowing missiles stitched together into a dense net over Snape's landing spot. Light flashed and flickered, but Snape did not raise a shield. Instead, he angled his wand toward where Flitwick would land. A pile of sharp rubble lay there. Fulgari! A shockwave slammed into the debris. Boom! The pile disintegrated into a high-velocity spray of shrapnel, flung outward with terrible kinetic force toward Flitwick's predicted landing. It was a brutal, physical counterstrike, a fence used as defense, precise and ruthless. Flitwick abandoned the woven missile net and displayed the adaptability of a former dueling champion. His wand spun, the air distorted, and a slippery curved shield formed. Most of the shrapnel struck that distorted air, skittering off in odd directions. The rest were avoided by his agile twisting of the body. For a heartbeat, the light curtain faltered, and Snape, like a shadowy bat, contorted impossibly and slipped through a narrow gap, utterly unharmed. They faced each other across the rubble, breathing a little faster. The arena was a ruin of dust and scorched stone. Low walls bore fresh scorch marks. In barely 10 seconds, the exchange had shifted like lightning, each spell exquisitely placed, leaving the students dazzled and their hearts pounding. The wind in the arena grew furious, carrying a low moan. Leaves and grit no longer tumbled randomly. They accelerated and spun as if pulled. The small whirlwind that had been mere wrist-thick a moment before stretched into a black dragon of wind, connecting earth to sky. It devoured everything in its path, debris, splintered wood, and continued to swell. What had been background became an undeniable third participant in the duel, roaring as it bore down on the center of the battlefield while the two combatants still stood squared off. Snape's black robes whipped like dark waves. His pale face flickered in and out of the sandstorm, though his eyes never strayed from Flitwick. The little professor struggled to keep his balance. His white hair stood on end in the gale, yet his bright eyes showed not panic, but the thrill of facing a worthy opponent. "Severus, it seems our audience is more enthusiastic than I expected." His voice cut through the wind and reached Snape clearly. A thin, cold twist of a smile barely moved Snape's mouth. "Indeed, very enthusiastic." He gave a barely perceptible nod. "But Professor Flitwick, a comfortable teaching career seems to have dulled your once keen perception." As he spoke, he thrust his wand forward, and a massive spell slammed into the tornado. The column of wind shifted instantly, veering toward Flitwick. Flitwick's eyes brightened. "Ascension flip!" He drove his wand, and the huge stones scattered on the ground rose under his command, spinning like cannonballs. They didn't fly at Snape. Instead, they plummeted straight into the attacking tornado column. "Periculum." Snape's voice came at the same instant. Boom, boom, boom. A string of violent explosions tore through the wind column's interior and edges. A shockwave swept across the arena, and a cloud of dust swallowed the stage. The tornado writhed, no longer moving smoothly, but thrashing like a wounded python. Its suction surged and slacked unpredictably. It vomited out clumps of stone and debris, mixed with strange smoke, which smashed into the surrounding ruins and protective barriers. A series of sharp gasps rose from the crowd as the arena shook with the fallout. 133. Professor McGonagall versus Zagreus. The students' fervor fed the raging magical vortex like invisible fuel. Under the deliberate, or perhaps accidental, catalysis of the two senior professors, the storm did not ebb. It swelled, taking on a more terrifying presence. The duel began to change. Snape and Professor Filius shifted into caution. Offense and defense measured now against the interference and drain of the wind column. The expanding vortex was like an unseen referee, roaring silently, as if urging them to finish quickly. The duel intensified into an all-out contest. The two evenly matched masters poured out everything they knew. Powerful spells grazed the vortex or were swept into it. The wind column ballooned, visibly expanding as energy roared within it, emitting a deep, heart-stopping rumble. Under the relentless feeding of residual magic from both sides, the tornado nearly filled the entire dueling arena. The gray-black wall of wind thinned to near transparency, and a dangerous light began to flare at its core, like a sun ready to go nova. Then one of Snape's cutting curses became the final spark. Rumble. With a deafening roar, the tornado, bloated to its limit, exploded like a powder keg. The shockwave flattened the arena in an instant. Debris, soil, and torn wood ejected into the air and were immediately ground to dust by an even fiercer energy. The crowd's gasps were swallowed by the blast. Two pure white beams of condensed light flared up, anchoring themselves around the duelists and holding them safe. A soft wind swept across the arena, clearing smoke and dust so that the scene lay exposed for everyone to see. Snape and Professor Filius stood tens of feet apart, each still wrapped in dissipating protective magic, and then completely unharmed. Between them, the massive stone tablet rose from the upturned earth, its surface shimmering with light, and finally settled on a single, clear word: draw. Without a word, the two professors lowered their wands, turned to the cheering stands, and bowed with formal solemnity. Snape's black robes billowed as he strode out of the arena. Filius straightened and pumped his small fist toward Ravenclaw, drawing a fresh eruption of screams from his house, then left with a light step. Magical cameras flashed, shutters clicked incessantly. Reporters pressed to the edge of the stands, eyes like searchlights, hungry for every detail of the exhibition match. In the first bout, the two deans had fought to a draw, and they had taken the duel to its limit, perfectly igniting the students' excitement. Headmaster Dumbledore rose, smiling, and lifted a hand to quiet the noise. His voice carried clearly through the hall. "Thank you, Severus and Filius, for a peerless, textbook demonstration of dueling. Though no victor was declared, the brilliance of courage, wisdom, and magic has lit up Hogwarts." He paused, his deep blue eyes sweeping the room, then announced solemnly, "Now, let us take a short break and prepare for the equally anticipated second match, featuring our extraordinary Transfiguration Master, Professor Minerva McGonagall." He pointed toward the far end of the faculty table. "Facing Professor Sagres Greengrass. Ladies and gentlemen, let us watch." "Whoop!" The Gryffindors roared, but amid the excitement, some younger students murmured with concern. "Professor McGonagall, Is she really okay? Seamus muttered, glancing at Sargeras's tall figure. I mean, Professor Greengrass isn't someone to be trifled with. Don't be daft, Seamus. Neville reddened and clenched his fists as if to cheer. Professor McGonagall is the deputy headmistress. My gran says she's very powerful. Ron frowned. But has anyone actually seen McGonagall fight, apart from taking points and giving detentions? Idiot. Transfiguration isn't just turning desks into pigs, Hermione snapped without turning her head. Professor Greengrass said in the first dueling class that transfiguration is a battlefield strategy. McGonagall is a master of that. Speaking of which, Dean Thomas added, eyes still bright from the earlier duel, I didn't expect how powerful Professor Filius can be when he gets serious. He was a dueling champion once, Harry said, watching the arena without blinking. I was more surprised by Snape. I thought Greengrass had him on the ropes in the first class. Where's Professor Sprout anyway? Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff asked, looking around. She'd rather be with magical plants than dueling. She's gentle, couldn't even bring herself to use a stern banishing charm on misbehaving house elves, someone murmured. Shh, be quiet, they're starting. Sargeras and Professor McGonagall stood before the stone tablet and, as before, tacitly chose random scene. The tablet shimmered and displayed the words Barren Mountains before fusing back into the ground. The flat arena seemed kneaded by a giant hand. Rugged terrain rose, jagged rocks half buried in soil, withered yellow weeds clinging in the cracks, low twisted shrubs dotting the expanse. Desolation and bleakness spread before the audience. Professor McGonagall, Sargeras bowed slightly. Since this is an exhibition, shall we focus on demonstrating Transfiguration's practical application in combat? Give the students a vivid, illustrative Transfiguration lesson? McGonagall's gaze sharpened, but she allowed a small, uncharacteristic smile. Then you'll need to be alert, Sargeras. In class I may be gentle, but here I'll show no mercy. That's even better, Professor McGonagall, Sargeras returned with a smile. I'm not the same student I was. Since leaving Hogwarts, I haven't been idle in my Transfiguration research. Very well, she said simply, wand already raised. I await your demonstration. Before her words fully faded, Sargeras swept his wand toward a large rock. The stone softened and reshaped under the influence of Transfiguration. A clear cry echoed as a blue-black giant eagle with a tremendous wingspan burst from the earth, flapping up and circling the arena. Ravenclaw howled in delight. The bird's cold, sharp eyes locked onto McGonagall, and it folded its wings into a dive. McGonagall's expression didn't change. In the same instant, she pointed at another boulder. It swelled and shuddered, and then a deep lion's roar rolled across the arena. A majestic lion with a bristling mane rose from the ground, crouched, muscles coiled, and launched itself like a cannonball to meet the diving eagle. Professor McGonagall! Gryffindor's cheers almost pierced the sky. The two beasts collided with a bone-jarring thud. Stone chips flew. The eagle's talons raked the lion, while the lion snapped at the eagle's wing. In close quarters, the lion's size and strength gave it the advantage. Sargeras's face remained composed. Another wave of his wand made the eagle's form ripple and flow like mercury. Its body elongated, its feathers turned to scales, and in a blink the great bird became a giant python. The python twisted and within seconds had coiled tightly around the lion's neck and abdomen, constricting with lethal force. Beautiful, Slytherin cheered, thrilled at the elegant transformation and their house's creature seemingly gaining the upper hand. The lion's body sagged under the constriction until McGonagall's wand darted forward. The coiled lion collapsed. Its volume shrank and warped, and as it twisted, it transfigured into a black and white badger. Though no longer awe-inspiring in size, the badger was slippery and quick. It wriggled from the python's crushing coils with the sinuous freedom of an eel, landed, and sprang at the python like lightning. Its sharp teeth bit mercilessly, tearing into the serpent's side with grating snaps. Well done, Hufflepuff! The Hufflepuff stands erupted, the house finally claiming its moment. Chapter 134. No Winner. Two giant beasts, sculpted from living rock, clashed on the barren mountain arena. Each collision sent stones spitting into the air. The students' cheers swelled, and charged by that rising excitement, the arena itself began to change. Fissures crawled across the ground, and tongues of molten heat flared from them. The earth in the center bulged upward like a swelling wound. Sagres did not want a war of attrition. He slashed his wand toward the ground. Where the badger and the giant python had been locked together, the hard crust suddenly softened and flowed like two converging mudslides, collapsing to swallow the two stone constructs. Professor McGonagall tapped her wand several times in reply. Boulders at the edge of the arena leapt up and reshaped themselves into several large, lithe black cats. They moved with feline silence, paws flexing as they circled Sagres from different directions. Sagres reacted instantly, flicking his wand at the path those cats raced along. The ground beneath them became a viscous, pitch-black mire. The leading cats sank, flailing. Sagres tapped again, and the quagmire solidified like iron, leaving only a few massive cat heads jutting out, trapped and useless. McGonagall's assault did not end there. Rocks, scrub, and the very soil obeyed her wand, animating into an onslaught. Ferocious stone wolves, roaring earth bears, shrieking flint falcons. An army of transfigured beasts surged like a flood toward Sagres. The young wizards watched in stunned silence. None of them had imagined transfiguration wielded so effectively in combat. It was a lesson that overturned everything they thought they knew. What shocked them most was the sheer forcefulness of McGonagall's offense. Against Sagres, a peer in power, she not only held her ground, but subtly dictated the tempo of the fight. Just as her stone host prepared to pounce, the crowd's roar reached a fever pitch. Boom! The central bulge in the arena finally erupted like a long-suppressed volcano. A plume of black smoke reeked of sulfur and shot skyward, and a torrent of lava gushed out like a river of wrath. Several rock beasts at the front were hurled into the air by that sudden, furious power. Molten droplets hissed as they struck the ground. The eruption became another weapon. McGonagall pointed at a flowing stream of lava and, with practiced precision, lifted and shaped it. The molten rock condensed and stretched into the form of a dragon, scales rippling with heat, its terrible breath raising the temperature around it. As it reared to spread its wings, Sagres was already pointing. A smoke-blackened chunk of stone, hurtling down from above, shapeshifted into a gigantic basalt hand, fingers splaying wide to crush. It swung at the lava dragon like a boot crushing an insect. The collision thundered, showering sparks and steam. McGonagall barely flinched. The struck dragon did not dissipate, but melted back into the flow, which surged and reformed into a yawning, fiery maw that snapped up at the hand. With that bite, the basalt wrist shattered under the heat and pressure, and half the stone hand tumbled away. Sagres remained composed. He gathered a falling globe of molten rock and, with a gesture, stretched and honed it into a glowing red arrow. It screamed through the air and pinned the newly formed lava head to the ground. McGonagall abandoned the pinned head and reshaped the river of lava between them. The molten flow stilled and then coalesced into a ferocious giant python, heat-laced light running between its scales. Sagres answered by twisting the python with his wand. The rear of its body convulsed and snapped into a second head, which lashed back toward its creator. A flicker of real concern crossed McGonagall's face. Her wand blurred as she wove spell after spell. Under her touch, the fangs and flesh of that second head writhed and split into countless thin serpents, fiery and writhing, each a living brand. She tapped once, and they became streams of light that streaked for Sagres. Sagres watched the sky-darkening swarm without alarm. He tapped the ground beneath him, and it rose like an answer to a king's command, lifting him atop a solitary peak dozens of feet tall. The lava snakes and the half-usurped python smashed uselessly against the peak's base, sending scorching sparks into the air. Standing on that precarious summit, Sagres pointed at the fragmented serpents, and with a twist of transfiguration, drew them together and reshaped them into one massive dark red javelin aimed straight at McGonagall. He flicked, and the javelin tore down through the smoke like a meteor. McGonagall, unperturbed, turned nearby granite into thick, angular shields and stacked them in front of her. Boom! The javelin struck the shields in a barrage of explosions, lava and stone clashing in blinding flashes as pieces shattered and rained hot debris. One shield crumbled, then another, then the next. Debris and molten shards littered the arena, and smoke curled into a thick fog. Sagres twisted the falling rubble into razor spikes that streaked toward McGonagall like a storm of bullets. He shaped the choking smoke into a colossal foot and let it descend to crush her. Merlin's beard, the young wizards breathed. At the last heartbeat, McGonagall faded from the spot as if peeled away, nothing left but a wisp of black smoke. The foot of smoke slammed down where she had stood, and an instant later she reappeared, unsteady, on a relatively intact boulder a dozen yards away. She was panting, a bead of sweat at her temple, and the reason was clear. Concealed within the smoke foot had been a deadly array of javelins. Dust swept across the arena, and black smoke billowed around them. McGonagall's shoulders sagged slightly. "I lost," she said, pursing her lips. "Your transfiguration is indeed very powerful. It was obvious even when you first came to Hogwarts." Sagres inclined his head. "I put a lot of effort into transfiguration." McGonagall's voice went softer than usual. Her stern features relaxed in an unusual vulnerability. "What do you intend to do now that you've returned to Hogwarts, Sagres?" He considered briefly, then answered simply, "Finish the books I never finished reading, and try to change some of the unpleasant things in the castle." "That was how I thought you might be," she said, as if remembering. "I regret that you had to endure what you did. I should have helped you then." "That wasn't your fault, Professor." Sagres waved his hand, and the last of the transformed creatures dissolved. He walked to the arena's center and summoned the dueling stone tablet. With a smooth flick of his wand, he wrote one word on it: "Draw." McGonagall's lips moved as if to speak, but Sagres dismissed it with a light gesture. "Better a draw," he said, "so the little lions don't hold a grudge." At once the smoke and dust vanished. Sagres and Professor McGonagall bowed to the audience and, amid roaring cheers, left the arena together. Dumbledore stood and began to clap. "What a splendid duel! Though it still ends in a draw, I hope this display of transfiguration has shown everyone its true charm. And now," he called, raising his voice, "Professor Nixia of Beauxbatons will face Professor Bafilus of Durmstrang. This will be the last exhibition match for today. I trust they will provide an equally thrilling contest." As his words faded, Nightingale and Bafilus were already at the center of the dueling arena, facing one another. A slow, meaning smile crossed Bafilus's face. "Professor Nixia," he said first, keeping his voice low between them, "the previous two matches ended in draws. If our match produces a clear victor, there will inevitably be a single, unmistakable loser tonight." He let the implication hang in the air. Nightingale's expression was as calm as still water. Her veil had been removed for the duel, and at last her breathtaking face was revealed to everyone. "You mean I'm to be the unfortunate loser?" Her voice was cool and level, giving nothing away. "Of course not." Bafilus's smile deepened, as if sharing a secret. "I would not wish that on you, Professor Nixia, but there is a small condition. It sounds as if you're very confident in your own skill." Nightingale's tone did not change. "I will not pretend I match you in potions, but when it comes to dueling—" He snorted softly, that characteristic Durmstrang arrogance audible. "Durmstrang's strength is unquestionable. So what exactly do you mean? I heard Miss Nixia has many admirers, yet you yourself remain indifferent. Perhaps, then, I might call you Vilas?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I think it's perfectly appropriate for you to call me Professor Nixia." Nightingale's voice stayed steady, neither pleased nor angry. "So you decline? Even if that makes you the only loser tonight?" Bafilus's smile hardened. "Professor Nixia, you should remember you do not represent only yourself right now. You represent all of Beauxbatons." "No need to worry for me," Nightingale answered placidly. "If I may remind you, Professor Greengrass told me any words we speak here, before the venue is chosen, will be heard by everyone present." Bafilus went pale. He turned and scanned the audience, only to find Karkaroff staring at him with a stone expression, eyes like ice picks. The students from the three schools were watching with curious faces. "You!" He swallowed and forced out a single syllable. "Professor," Nightingale said quietly at that moment, "I hope you have thought through what you're about to say." Bafilus let out a tight laugh, his cheek muscles twitching. He swallowed his shame and tried to pass it off. "It was only a joke. I hope Professor Nixia takes no offense." "I certainly don't." Nightingale allowed the faintest smile. It was, after all, very amusing. The smile was brief, but Bafilus no longer had the heart to savor it. Humiliation churned into an ugly, burning pride. He wanted to crush the woman who had shamed him and to get out of this place full of prying eyes as quickly as possible. The two of them selected a scene, and the light on the stone tablet flowed until it settled on shallow swamp. As the slab sank into the ground, the arena twisted and reformed. Damp mist rose, putrid bubbles breached the surface of the mud, filling the air with the tang of sulfur. Murky water reflected Baphilus's distorted face, shame igniting his resolve. "Confringo," he roared, hurling his wand forward. A dazzling scarlet beam shot for Nightingale's face. The crowd gasped. The Beauxbatons students even stood, tense and worried. But Nightingale did not flinch. She did not perform any flamboyant flourish. Her ornate wand traced a lazy arc, and a pure ice-blue beam met the scarlet curse precisely, dissipating it. With another effortless flick, she caused frost to bloom in the air. Cold surged toward Baphilus. He managed a hurried, choked spell. Protego, raising a nearly perfect shield charm with astonishing speed. The attempt deflected the spell's force to the ground. But before he could recover, Nightingale thrust her wand forward. Glacius Maxima! A thunderous explosion ripped up from the impact. The swampy ground detonated into a great pit. Mud and sewage froze into a ring of grotesque ice spikes around the edge. The students jumped back at the sudden blast. In the bottom of the pit, a blue ice sculpture stood, radiating bitter cold. It had captured Baphilus's last expression, the twisted fury of being stopped mid-strike, so perfectly that the shock and disbelief in his eyes seemed preserved. His entire body, even the heavy Durmstrang fur cloak, was encased in steel-hard ice. Not a hair showed. Sunlight struck the sculpture, throwing back a cold, blinding glitter. The ice crept steadily inward, sealing him completely. Nightingale lowered her wand and said calmly, "Professor Baphilus seems to be the only loser today." She turned, bowed gracefully to the crowd, and as she straightened, a soft white light flared on Baphilus. The stone tablet rose from the mud, and as the lights on its surface swirled, Nightingale had already left the arena. She hadn't even looked at the match result displayed on the tablet. The crowd erupted. Hogwarts and Beauxbatons students were the first to leap to their feet. Applause, stomping, whistles, and exultant cries merging into a fevered roar. Even some Durmstrang students waved at Nightingale. In their school, strength commanded respect. Madame Maxime wore a composed smile as she explained to the swarm of reporters snapping pictures. Nixia, as Beauxbatons potions professor, has been exceptional in every respect. In less than a year, she's raised her students' potions marks dramatically. Only Karkaroff, already looking ill, did not wait for Dumbledore to announce the result. He rose and left the arena immediately. The students, meanwhile, buzzed with excitement. Boys and girls alike were abuzz about Nightingale. Merlin's beard, just one move, and he was done. Ron was so excited he let half his pumpkin juice slop from the cup. That big oaf from Durmstrang practically asked for it, Hermione said, unusually animated, eyes shining. You can say that again. Neville's voice carried over the seats. Professor Nixia wiped him out instantly. Before the duel, he said she had many admirers? Someone asked. No surprise. Count me one of them now, a seventh-year crowed, grinning. Laughter rippled through the group. Count me in, George added, elbowing closer. Count me in too, Fred said, and with a flourish, conjured a huge bouquet of singing red roses. And while we're at it, sign up Percy and little Ron for us. Don't be ridiculous, Fred, Percy said, flush with indignation. Hey, count me in too. Kestrel poked her head over and, smiling broadly, declared the same. Harry and Ron kept cheering as Nightingale's back receded from sight. Not far off, Hermione, excitement making her cheeks pink, snapped her book shut and secreted a thumbs up toward the departing professor. Dumbledore stood and announced the results of the exhibition match to thunderous applause. When the professor's demonstration officially ended, no one noticed when Professor Baffaros slipped away quietly. The great hall was awash in ecstatic noise. Reporters were like nifflers around treasure. Not a moment was missed, and the magic cameras flashed constantly. Unsurprisingly, that afternoon, the front page of the special edition of the Daily Prophet belonged to the Frost Queen, while the four Hogwarts professors' dazzling performance was relegated to a small corner. Professor Baffaros of Durmstrang, the defeated opponent, was mentioned repeatedly in the article, but received no praise. Frost verdict: Professor Nixia instantly defeats Durmstrang's dueling master. 3 schools stunned. An ice spell ignites heated debate in the wizarding world. Durmstrang head departs on the spot. By Fishtag Merle. When Durmstrang's iron-blooded Professor Baflaros strode into the dueling ring with his habitual insolent smile, he likely thought he was facing little more than an ordinary potions teacher. 30 seconds later, Hogwarts witnessed a moment destined for dueling history. Bogbitton's Frost Queen, Valus Nixia, raised her wand once and, with a single spell, turned the arrogant dueling master into a frozen Durmstrang ice sculpture. It is worth noting that before the duel, Professor Baflaros said something to Professor Nixia that prompted Durmstrang's headmaster, Karkaroff, to storm out immediately afterward. Insiders say this is related to Durmstrang's long-standing culture of gender discrimination. He had it coming, a Hogwarts female student who wished to remain anonymous told our reporter. Professor Nixia taught him a lesson in the most elegant way. Indeed, the moment Professor Baflaros was frozen was one of the most shocking in dueling history. His furious expression, his raised wand, even the frozen surprise in his eyes were perfectly preserved in crystalline ice. His usually upturned lips were locked into a comic question mark, catching the light with bitter irony. During the most humiliating moment of his career, the president of the International Dueling League even sent a brief comment by Owl. This is unquestionably the most exquisite practical application of ice magic in the past decade. I've said it before, Fleur Delacour of Beauxbatons told this paper in an exclusive interview. Professor Nixia is far more than a potions master. She was once the youngest Auror training officer candidate invited by the French Ministry of Magic, and only declined because it clashed with her teaching. This is exactly why I insisted on inviting Professor Nixia to take part in this exchange, Madame Maxime said. She's proven that Beauxbatons is not only about elegance, but about power. Continued on page 3, Tracing Ice Magic, an analysis of the spell types used by Professor Nixia from Rune Studies. The article included 4 photographs. Figure 1, Professor Baflaros completely frozen in the center of the dueling arena. Figure 2, a close-up of Professor Nixia gracefully waving her wand. Figure 3, Headmaster Karkaroff's awkward moment as he storms out. Figure 4, students from all 3 schools cheering wildly. Fueled by the coverage, Professor Nixia's name swept across Europe within a day. The cheers from the exhibition match were still echoing, but back at Hogwarts, things were already moving quickly. On the professor's careful recommendations, and with enthusiastic self-nominations from the students, 8 elites were chosen to represent Hogwarts in the Tri-School United Dueling Tournament. They would carry the school's honor into the competition. The team was Ravenclaw, 2, Penelope Clearwater, Oris Alcott; Hufflepuff, 2, Cedric Diggory, Gabriel Truman; Slytherin, 2, Terrence Higgs, Charlene Avery; Gryffindor, 2, Percy Weasley, Eloise Dufresne. The announcement became the new focus of conversation in the castle, except for 4th-year Cedric Diggory, already known for his composure and strength beyond his years. The other 7 were all 5th-year students or older. Half of them were prefects. Although their dueling badges had only just been approved, their rankings within their houses and the school were high. They were not to be underestimated. As Hogwarts' top student combatants, they were about to face the elites from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. After the list was posted, the castle's atmosphere shifted. The chosen students became the center of attention, receiving admiring looks and whispered praise wherever they went. The notice board in the Great Hall was crowded as everyone checked the names again and again. Excitement, anticipation, and a touch of nervous pride filled the corridors. Percy, congratulations! In the Gryffindor common room, Fred and George slung their arms over their older brother's shoulders, grinning. Puss, now you're really somebody. Percy straightened, adjusted his glasses, and tried to keep his prefect's dignity, though his smile betrayed him. This is a responsibility, Fred. I represent Hogwarts. I must give it my best. Listen to that. What an inspiring speech, Fred teased. Very worthy of a Gryffindor prefect. George winked. Seriously, do you want us to supply you with some off-field props? That would certainly make an impression, but might be a little unsafe. Fred added with wicked relish. You two, that's enough. Percy's face fell. I'm representing Hogwarts. How could I do something like that? Oh, don't be angry. George's smile didn't fade. We were only suggesting it. Up to you whether to accept. Exactly, Fred chimed in. And we put a lot of work into these. Limited edition, you know. Not far away, Ron and Hermione were trying to cheer up a somewhat dejected Harry. Don't be discouraged, they said. We're only in our second year. By the time we're in our fifth, you'll definitely be able to represent Hogwarts. Your Expelliarmus is strong, Harry, Ron said with confidence. I'd wager some older students aren't as good. Don't patronize me, Harry replied. I know we're behind the older students. If I went up there now, I'd only embarrass Hogwarts. It's good you understand that, Hermione said, closing her book. Professor McGonagall said Hogwarts will hold similar dueling competitions every year from now on. If you really study this year, I promise you'll be in next year's group. But Hermione, this book is incredibly difficult. Catching up with older students in 1 year, Harry began. Why would that be impossible? Hermione looked at them both earnestly. Don't forget, Cedric Diggory is only in his 4th year. You don't dislike Diggory, do you? Ron said, frowning. A lot of people like him. That's not what I meant, Hermione snapped. My point is, in a year we could close the gap. In a year we'll only be 3rd years, Harry pointed out. But we have magic, Hermione said forcefully. Have you forgotten what Professor Greengrass taught us, awakening requiem and sleep evaporation? If we use every minute wisely, we can stand out next year and represent Gryffindor. Well, Ron hesitated, then brightened. Maybe it's not impossible? Harry's eyes lit up. But won't it be a lot of work? That's your choice, Hermione said, folding her arms. But I warn you, if I'm on that stage next year, you'll only be allowed to cheer from the audience. Both boys' faces brightened instantly. You're right, Hermione. Of course we'll study, Ron declared, a touch melodramatic. If nothing else for Hogwarts. Harry nodded at once. Chapter 137, 24-12. The next day, the flags of the 3 schools fluttered above the dueling arena. The headmasters and headmistress sat in the judges' seats with differing expressions. Madame Maxime poised and elegant, Karkaroff restless, his fingers drumming on the armrest as his eyes kept flicking to the tall, silent figure from Durmstrang, Victor Krum. When everyone was seated, Dumbledore rose. His gentle voice carried through the arena. The rules are simple, he said. 8 contestants from each school will duel one-on-one. Winners advance until a champion is decided. He added with a faint smile, this contest is to showcase skill and character. Any use of the unforgivable curses is forbidden. Remember, you represent your school. No sooner had he finished than 2 names lit up on the stone tablet, and the Gryffindors erupted. Percy Weasley took a breath, smoothed his prefect badge almost instinctively, and stepped onto the platform, somewhat stiff. His opponent was a tall, cold-faced 6th year from Beauxbatons. Random scenario? He asked. Yes, she replied. The tablet flashed a location, Fountain Plaza, and sank with a rumble. The arena shifted. Great fountains burst from the stone, columns of water spouting, mists swirling. The Beauxbatons girl's lips curved slightly. Her wand traced an arc, and a loose slab of stone under Percy shot forward. Percy reacted with textbook reflexes. Protego, he cried. An invisible shield sprang up. The stone smashed into it. The barrier shuddered, and Percy staggered. He answered instantly. Expelliarmus. A red jet of light sliced through the air. The girl danced gracefully aside and murmured, Binding spell. Ropes shot out and coiled around Percy's arms. Laxus! He barked. The rope slackened and fell away. He seized the chance and fired. Stupefy. The Beauxbatons witch was quicker. She flicked her wand silently at the same instant Percy cast. The ground beneath him loosened into mud. His legs sank. He rolled, ripping himself free in a bedraggled sprawl, his robes smeared. Oh, Percy! Fred and George howled from the stands, theatrically distraught. Hermione leaned forward, whispering, Nonverbal? That was a skilled nonverbal. Impressive. The girl pressed the attack. Obstacle curse, she called, and a spell struck the patch of ground where Percy had rolled, kicking up dust. Twice already he'd slipped free by rolling, but it had left him on the defensive and messy. The Beauxbaton side cheered. Even the Hogwarts students were impressed by the effortless nonverbal work. The cheers grew, the spray of fountains gleamed, and Percy looked more harried with each drop. His robes were streaked with mud, and his prefect badge had been knocked off. If Kestrel hadn't put them through snowman special training, he might have been finished. After narrowly avoiding another flying slab, Percy remembered Sagres's advice from dueling class. Constant evasion leads only to passive, awkward defeat. Without looking, he raised his hand and cast Petrificus Totalis. The spell's light skimmed the girl's hair. For a heartbeat, her pupils narrowed in shock. Percy seized the opening and flung his hand toward the nearest fountain. Obstacle curse, he cried. The torrent of water bucked under his spell, changing direction in a geyser toward the girl like a high-pressure blast. Percy fired off a couple more spells into the water curtain, still without watching the results, then rolled away from his original spot. The fountain stilled. The stone tablet in the arena rose with a roar, and to answer the crowd's curiosity, projected a huge magical replay. It showed Percy redirecting the water with the obstacle curse, using the curtain to obscure his opponent's view, and then firing the Petrificus Totalis through the spray, one of the spells that hit her, freezing the image the moment Percy rolled to safety. Percy Weasley wins. Hogwarts erupted. Distant applause came even from the Beauxbatons stands. Percy's face lit with excitement, but he forced his expression back under control. The Beauxbatons girl bowed and left. Percy found his prefect badge on the ground, waved to the stands, and hurried off. Fred and George clapped him on the back with loud, mock-grand congratulations. Even the usually stern Professor McGonagall allowed herself a small smile. The next duels kept the audience on edge. A seventh-year Ravenclaw used an exquisite transfiguration to turn his opponent's wand into a slippery eel. Hufflepuff's Cedric Diggory displayed remarkable poise and practical skill, combining an obstacle curse with a perfectly timed Expelliarmus to beat a sixth year from Durmstrang. The crowd cheered the loudest for his bout. Madame Maxime watched with approval and leaned toward McGonagall. "A very promising young man, quick-witted and graceful," she murmured. Durmstrang's students favored a tougher, more direct style. Their spells carried practical force. The appearance of Victor Krum sent the atmosphere to a fever pitch. He faced Slytherin's former seeker, Terence Higgs. Higgs tried to tire Krum by dodging, but Krum's movements were efficient and precise. His shield charm easily turned aside Higgs's attack, and a silent Petrificus Totalis left Higgs stiff as a log. The match lasted seconds. Krum barely moved. The Durmstrang section erupted into thunderous cheers and synchronized stomping. By the end of the first round, there were 12 qualifiers, 3 from Hogwarts, 4 from Beauxbatons, and 5 from Durmstrang. It was hardly a surprise. Hogwarts had suffered from frequent turnover in defense against the dark arts instructors in recent years, and practical dueling instruction had been inconsistent. Those 3 qualifiers owed a lot to Sagres' focused training over the past 2 years. Durmstrang, by contrast, had a long tradition of practical combat training. Even ordinary students often showed impressive skill in the arena. As the sun set, the first day of the tournament drew to a close. 138, Chapter 12-6. As night fell, the Great Hall at Hogwarts was brightly lit, but the mood felt subdued. The tables were still piled with food, yet students kept their voices low, glancing frequently and nervously in the directions of Durmstrang and Beauxbatons. "Only 3 of us." Hermione bit her lip, fingers tapping the table without meaning to. "Durmstrang has almost twice as many." "At least we weren't completely wiped out," Ron muttered, poking at a pie with his fork. Percy's match was a close call, if it hadn't been for that last move. "He used the environment," Harry said quietly. "Professor Greengrass always says dueling isn't just about spell work, it's about using the venue." Fred and George were uncharacteristically sober. They simply exchanged a look. George sighed. "Looks like tomorrow we'll have to rely on Cedric and Aulius again." Percy sat rigidly at the Gryffindor table, his prefect badge catching the candlelight. He kept a serious face and only nodded when people offered faint congratulations. At the Ravenclaw table, Aulius Arc was surrounded by classmates. The 7th year answered a few questions calmly, but mostly ate in silence. Cedric Diggory, by contrast, relaxed easily among the Hufflepuffs who clustered around him, chattering about his victory. He smiled at them and occasionally flipped through the thick book on his lap, a comprehensive record of medieval spell changes from the restricted section. Its spine was yellowed and the pages bore the wear of heavy use. Cedric still remembered being an auditor in Professor Greengrass's theoretical class last year, and being forbidden to ask questions. He'd been embarrassed, but after class, Greengrass had recommended this very book to him. The professor had handed over the approved borrowing slip with a brief, almost approving look in his gray eyes. It was the first time Cedric had ever borrowed something from the restricted section. The book not only traced the evolution of spells, but contained knowledge of dangerous magic as well. Once, while researching in the library, Cedric had seen Professor Greengrass there too, reading. When Cedric had worked up the courage to ask for guidance, he found the professor less stern in private. Greengrass had explained things in detail and even wrote notes in the margins for him. Cedric hadn't returned the book yet. He suspected Madame Pince would accuse him of desecrating books if she saw his annotations. The next day, the dueling arena buzzed louder than the day before. The stands were packed. Percy Weasley drew the first match again, and this time his luck was worse. He was paired with Fleur Delacour. The Beauxbatons girl walked onto the stage with silver-gray hair that shimmered like moonlight. She was stunningly elegant and moved with a grace that drew eyes across the stands. But she was more than a pretty face. Baffaroth had been an example to the contrary. Fleur's one-quarter Vila blood gave her extraordinary magical talent. Though only a fifth year, she had already earned Beauxbatons' tricolor ribbon medal, the school's highest honor. When the stone tablet in the arena rumbled and sank, Percy wasted no time, waving his wand to summon an obstacle curse and seize the initiative. Fleur's reaction was faster. She slipped a step aside and with a casual flick of her wrist sent a dazzling crimson jet of magic from her wand. Stupefy! The spell hit like lightning. Percy scrambled to raise a shield charm, but Fleur's magic overpowered it. The shield shattered with a bang. The blast knocked Percy back several steps, and before he could recover, she fired again. Expelliarmus! Percy rolled and narrowly avoided the disarming curse, then fired back blindly. A streak of light from a Petrificus Totalis grazed Fleur's cheek, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she released 3 silent spells in quick succession. First, a glissade that struck the ground beneath Percy's feet, making him lose his footing. Then 2 conjured ropes that coiled tightly around him, and finally a searing fireball to the chest. A flash of white, and Percy went down. The great hall went briefly silent before erupting into stunned cheers. The match had ended faster than anyone had expected. Fleur had won with only 5 spells. She lifted her chin and gave an elegant bow to the judges. Cedric closed his book gently, fingers tracing its spine, and watched her walk away with a thoughtful frown. So strong, and only a 5th year, he murmured. Her power was nearly that of an adult witch. Her spell sequencing and timing were astonishingly mature. Rumors about her Vila blood seemed true. Cedric couldn't help thinking of Professor Nixia, who also had Vila ancestry. The same silver hair and that same poised elegance made him wonder if there was any connection. Or perhaps the potions professor had tutored her privately. He shook his head, setting the thought aside. At center stage, Victor Krum and Alias Arc were already selecting their scenarios. Krum, also a 5th year, was not to be underestimated. He'd long shown the potential of a top duelist. His wand work, stance, and explosive, precise spellcasting were all textbook perfect. As a fellow seeker, Cedric knew Krum's flexibility and muscular, steady build only added to his prowess. Arc, by contrast, looked slight and bookish. The Ravenclaw Senior was a prodigy in academics. Cedric remembered seeing his Transfiguration essay published in Transfiguration Today, but his slender frame and awkward evasive moves marked him as a scholar first and a battlefield duelist second. As the stone tablet sank, the center of the arena rippled and the duel scene shifted. The arena's floor warped into an ancient magic library. Towering shelves erupted from the ground, and dust-dark tomes floated in midair. Alka's eyes brightened. This setting played to his strengths. The duel began, and he fell back at once. His wand tapped lightly, and a heavy, ancient book flew open before him, its pages rustling. He muttered an incantation, and yellowed sheets peeled away like leaves. Then, under his transfiguration, each page shimmered into a razor-edged flying blade that streaked toward Krum. Krum's wand circled once, and a flame flared into being. Incendio! A scorching wave of heat swept through the blades, turning them to ash. Alki only smiled. Stupefy! A sudden scarlet bolt leapt from the dying fire, moving with lethal speed. Gasps ran through the stands. Crumb's reflexes were even faster. He barely shifted his body, and the stupefy missed. He countered instantly, no elaborate words needed. His wand slashed like a sword, and a silver cutting spell shot from its tip. Alk, less nimble, could only throw up a shield charm. The translucent barrier trembled and was shoved back by the impact. Crumb pressed the attack. Before the shockwaves subsided, another flash, Expelliarmus, followed. Alki reacted quickly. He swept his wand horizontally, and the nearest bookshelf slid into the path of the spell, taking the hit. He didn't stop there. He wove a cascade of movements, shifting shelves to build a barricade between them, then flicked his wand aside. A mahogany desk, twisted and warped, transfigured into a massive silver-gray wolf that howled, white fangs bared. A murmur of astonishment rose from the crowd. Such sophisticated transfiguration was no ordinary student trick. Crumb's answer was a flurry. Using his physical advantage, he hurled several digging 3 feet strikes at the blocking shelves. The shelves splintered and exploded, wood chips and pages scattered, and in seconds his agile form burst through the wreckage and surged toward Alki. Alki unleashed the wolf and hurled spells from every angle, but Krum had already cast an acceleration charm on himself. He darted and rolled, sidestepping attacks with sharp, efficient movements. When the wolf leapt, Krum raised his wand and an elegant diffindo lanced out. The spell struck the wolf's chest and it collapsed instantly, the transformed desk snapping back into splinters. Incarcerus! A volley of ropes shot from the air, seeking to bind Krum, but he didn't slow. He hurled a bombarda forward. Boom! The explosion shredded 3 more bookshelves into dust. Pages flew like confetti, and the ropes vanished. Krum emerged from the smoke and hammered a rapid succession of spells at Alki. Alki fell back, barely keeping up a shield charm. The red spell jets came too fast. His shield wavered and then shattered. An Expelliarmus connected. His wand was ripped from his hand and flew across the arena. The duel was decided. Silence hung for a heartbeat, then the stands erupted in applause. Krum sheathed his wand and inclined his head in a modest nod. Alka rubbed his wrist and gave a rueful grin. I suppose I need more practical experience. Krum surprised him with praise. Your magic is strong, and your timing's precise, he said. In a team duel, you'd be formidable. Alki accepted the offered wand and nodded, conceding. In the stands, Igor Karkaroff could not hide his delight. He leaned toward Dumbledore and Madame Maxime, voice loud and triumphant. See? My boys are in top form, aren't they? Madame Maxime remained composed, inclining her head delicately. Your students are impressive, but Principal Karkaroff, the competition isn't over yet. She cast an encouraging look at her own pupils. Dumbledore watched Alki at the arena's center with a gentle smile. Every student who steps into the arena deserves praise. Of course you'd say that, Karkaroff snapped, bitterness curling his smile. Hogwarts only has 1 student left. Lose another, and you're out completely. Dumbledore did not rise to the bait. He simply let his gaze drift from the arena to Karkaroff, the warmth of his smile unchanged. Igor, the arena changes in an instant. It's unwise to celebrate too soon. Besides, his eyes flicked meaningfully toward Professor Bagpharos of Durmstrang. Right now, Durmstrang has the most to lose. Karkaroff's smugness faltered as if struck. He stiffened, crossed his arms, and sank back into his seat, though his eyes stayed glued to the arena. He muttered under his breath, Just you wait, Albus. You'll see soon enough. The following duels moved quickly. A burly 7th year from Durmstrang strode in to face a nervous 6th year from Beauxbatons. The match barely lasted 3 minutes. Durmstrang's attacks were relentless, angled, and punishing. The Beauxbaton student maintained shields and fought hard, but was driven back until a precise sandstorm spell struck and ended the duel. The difference in skill was stark. They're all like seasoned duelists, Kestrel said, leaning toward Sagres with concern as the Durmstrang student left the arena. Sagres nodded calmly. It's the school's culture. Durmstrang teaches ruthless offense. Kestrel brightened with a new curiosity. Weren't you the best when you were there? And your marks were perfect, weren't they? Sagres' expression stayed flat, almost unreadable. That's different, he said. Like you, I had perfect grades. Kestrel blinked. So what do you mean? He turned to her at last, eyes steady. Good marks don't stop you from getting beaten in a duel. Her face fell as if the air had been let out of a balloon. So you mean even if you do well in exams, you can still be bad at dueling? A faint corner of a smile touched Sagres's mouth. What I mean is the opposite. Even if I'd failed every exam, it wouldn't have kept me from being top in duels. Kestrel gaped. You? What? You said you failed everything? Not at all. Sagres shrugged, casual. I got full marks in my studies. Kestrel's confusion lingered. So, exam results and dueling, Sagres said simply, are two different things. Kestrel opened her mouth to argue and then closed it, the words catching in her throat. She thought of her own record and swallowed, letting out a small, indistinct sigh. Just then, another tall figure in a fur-trimmed Durmstrang cloak stepped onto the stage. His stride was steady, his build imposing, like a bear surveying its territory. Almost at the same moment, Hogwarts' Cedric Diggory took his place opposite him. The match began, and the Durmstrang student unleashed a storm of attacks. Red Stupefy and blue Petrificus Totalis rained down like hail. Cedric at first looked passive. His shield charms flickered precariously under the onslaught, like a small boat in a storm. Merlin, he's going to be torn apart. Astoria gripped the edge of her robes, teeth chattering. It's not as bad as it looks, Luna said casually. He's finding his rhythm. What? Astoria barely heard. As if to confirm Luna's words, after a dangerous sidestep to avoid a cutting spell that grazed his ear, Cedric's eyes sharpened. He stopped relying on shield charms to block everything and began to move, light on his feet, evading the most lethal spells while his wand darted out like a striking snake. 1, 2, 3. He fired precise, rapid spells, Expelliarmus and a string of impediment jinxes, not to fell his opponent outright, but to disrupt, delay, and compress his space. The Durmstrang student's powerful attacks began to miss or struck the stage's protective barrier with a shower of sparks. He looked like a provoked but hobbled beast, strong but with nowhere to vent that power. His footwork became erratic and his spells lost accuracy. Then, Cedric abandoned his defense and launched an all-out offense, catching his opponent off guard. He seized a moment of stiffness created by an overcast spell and jabbed his wand forward. A condensed red bolt pierced the edge of the Durmstrang student's retracting shield charm and struck squarely in the chest. The fierce expression frozen on the other boy's face, his body toppled backwards like a felled tree and hit the stage with a heavy thud. Hogwarts erupted in cheers. Kestrel nearly leapt out of her seat. Sagres, however, remained impassive, only granting a faint, almost imperceptible nod, as if this had been expected. A beautiful counterattack, he murmured. After intense competition, 6 qualifiers emerged. Hogwarts was represented only by Cedric Diggory. Beauxbaton sent 2 witches. Durmstrang occupied the other 3 slots. The final day arrived, and the air hummed with a sharper tension than before. 6 duels would follow in quick succession, the first 3 brutal 6-3 elimination bouts, the last 3 to decide the top 3 placings. Fleur Delacour went out first, facing a 6th-year Durmstrang witch. Her wand moved with graceful precision. After a few agile dodges, she found a tiny opening and cut through with a crisp Expelliarmus. Her opponent's wand flew from her hand, and the victory was clean. Next came Crumb against a 7th-year Beauxbaton's witch. From the moment they engaged, Crumb's oppressive style was evident. Few probes, rapid wand work, fierce and relentless spells. Though the Beauxbaton's witch fought fiercely with dazzling defenses, Crumb's mountain-like pressure shattered them. A final, powerful stupefy hit her squarely in the chest. She stumbled and collapsed. Crumb's win was swift and decisive. The third match, one everyone at Hogwarts had been waiting for, began when Cedric stepped onto the dueling stage opposite a burly 7th-year Durmstrang student named Paro Karkaroff. Despite being only 17, Karkaroff wore a thick beard and regarded Cedric with open disdain, as if judging an insect that had wandered into an arena. Random scenario? Karkaroff sneered. Cedric nodded. Then, without warning, Karkaroff thrust his wand out. Stupefy! A blinding red jet shot directly for Cedric's head. By a reflex honed on the Quidditch pitch, Cedric barely turned his head, and the bolt whistled past his ear, smashing into the protective barrier with a harsh sizzle. Cowardly! Ron bellowed. He fouled! That was a sneak attack! Hermione's hair lifted with anger. Ernie Macmillan's voice was the loudest in the stands. He was cursing so loudly that spittle almost flew toward the Durmstrang students in front of him. Shameless, disgraceful. Is this what they teach at Durmstrang? Karkaroff's face went pale, but Sagres put a restraining hand on Ernie's shoulder just in time. "This is a competition, Mr. Macmillan," Sagres said calmly. "A nod means it has begun. If he wasn't ready, he shouldn't have nodded." "But, Professor, isn't that tactic beneath the belt?" Ernie protested. "Morality is for self-admonition," Sagres replied without looking away from the stage. "You cannot rely on your opponent's morals." "Professor Greengrass, do you mean we should do the same?" Hermione asked in disbelief. "Not should, but can," Sagres said, finally meeting her eyes. "The opponent has given you a lesson for free. You can learn from it, whether in defense or attack." As he spoke, his gaze snapped back to the stage. Karkaroff smirked and closed the distance. "Confringo," he bellowed. A destructive, blasting curse slammed toward Cedric. He rolled, debris and shattered stone raining around him. He fought back, forcing out Expelli. But before the charm completed, a swift, silent, impediment jinx from Karkaroff sent him flying. Cedric hit the cold platform hard. The blow knocked the breath from him and left him reeling as if his organs had been shifted. "Get up, little one!" Karkaroff mocked in heavy-accented English. "Is Hogwarts out of people, sending a fourth-year kid to embarrass yourselves?" Pain flared through Cedric's body, but he refused to lose his composure. He had known Karkaroff was trying to provoke him. Recognizing that steadied him. He forced himself up, shifting his weight and regaining his footing. Karkaroff, surprised at Cedric's quick recovery, spat insults and raised his wand again. "Crucio, stop!" Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout both roared from the judge's table, their voices full of shock and anger. Unforgivable curses were absolutely forbidden.